Hey there, tonight we're diving into the juggling act of a medieval jester's life, not the fairy tale version you know, and discovering why the harsh reality was more gallows than giggles. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, you think being a medieval jester was all about tumbling around in a silly hat and making the king chuckle while sipping his mead? Well, strap in, because the life of a jester was less comedy hour and more high-stakes improv with a dash of existential dread. Let's start with the basics, origins. Jesters didn't just pop into medieval courts like a surprise act at a royal talent show. Their roots stretch back to the ancient world. Think of them as the ancestors of today's stand-up comedians, but with less Netflix specials and more dodging of literal thrown tomatoes. The ancient Egyptians had their own brand of jesters, and the Greeks, they were all about those plays with a side of satire. But it's the Romans who really laid down the jester blueprint, with their fools who entertained the patricians with wit and wisdom, or at least enough of both to avoid the business end of a gladius. Fast forward a few centuries, and these jesters have wormed their way into medieval courts. And no, they weren't just clowns in tights. They were integral parts of court life, playing a role that was as precariously balanced as their acrobatics. Now, let's debunk a myth right off the bat, the so-called fool's freedom. You know, the romantic notion that jesters were really the smartest guys in the room, speaking truth to power while everyone else was too busy kissing the king's ring. Sure, jesters had a certain leeway to poke fun at their betters, but this came with strings attached. Imagine having the freedom to criticize your boss, but if you go too far, you're out of a job, or worse. Not exactly a position of power, right? One particularly infamous jester was Roland le Pedor. This guy had a gig where once a year he performed unum soltum et syphildum et unum bumbulum for King Henry Roman II of England. If your Latin's a bit rusty, that translates to one jump, one whistle, and one fart. Yes, you heard that right. Roland's annual performance was all about breaking wind in the king's presence. It sounds absurd, but in return he received a manor in Suffolk. Not bad for a bit of flatulence, though it does paint a picture of the kind of highbrow humor expected at court. But let's talk fashion, darling. Forget the flashy doublets and feathered caps you see in the movies. A jester's wardrobe was a curious mix of the ridiculous and the practical. Their garish attire, designed to draw attention and laughs, could cost a pretty penny, sometimes as much as a knight's suit of armor. And if you think that's a fair trade, remember that armor might save your life in battle, while a jester smartly just marked you as the court clown expected to entertain no matter the mood of your audience. The economic reality of being a jester wasn't all jest and japes either. Sure, they were compensated, but their pay was often as unpredictable as their routines. A jester might be showered with gifts one day and ignored the next. It was feast or famine, making financial stability as elusive as a coherent plot in a medieval romance. And then there's the social ladder, or lack thereof. Jesters were always on the outside looking in, no matter how many royal feasts they attended. They stood apart from the noble ranks, often viewed with a mix of amusement and disdain. So, while it's tempting to romanticize the jester as a wise sage in a fool's garb, the truth is far more nuanced. They danced on a razor's edge, balancing wit with the whims of their royal patrons. And if they misstepped, well, let's just say that the king's mercy was as unpredictable as a court jester's punchline. Stay tuned, because there's more to unravel about the life and times of these medieval performers, and it's definitely no laughing matter. And speaking of walking tightropes, let's dive deeper into a jester's daily grind, because it wasn't all about pratfalls and punchlines. Sure, they were the king's goda for a good laugh, but these jesters had a job description that would make even the most seasoned LinkedIn recruiter shudder. Beyond jesting, these court comedians played a critical role in the intricate dance of court politics. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a modern-day spin doctor, only they swapped press releases for puns and had to dodge the occasional sharp-tongued retort, or worse. Now, You think being a comedian meant steering clear of sensitive topics, but jesters walked a fine line, often tasked with delivering bad news. And no, they couldn't just send a sorry for your loss card and call it a day. Imagine having to tell a king his latest military campaign was a bust, and doing so with a joke that wouldn't land you in the stocks. A jester had to be a master of diplomacy, wrapping hard truths in humor like a bitter pill in honey. Fail to get the balance right, you might find yourself out of a job, or with your head on the chopping block. Take the tale of Will Somers, the jester for King Henry Roman VIII. This wasn't a guy who just danced around making fart noises. Somers was known for his sharp wit and even sharper insight, often using his humor to influence court decisions. He had the king's ear in a way many courtiers envied, but this privilege was a double-edged sword. When Henry was in one of his infamous rages, like after a less than favorable update on the war with France, Somers had to tread lightly. One wrong quip, and it'd be off with his head. Literally. Economically, the life of a jester was as unpredictable as the British weather. Sure, a court jester might enjoy the luxury of royal favor, and let's be real, a steady gig with room and board in a lavish castle beats the uncertainty of freelance work. But this wasn't a ticket to easy street. Payment could be as erratic as a jester's antics. Some days you were showered with gifts, an extra goblet of mead, a new tunic. Other days you were left scraping for scraps. A jester's financial security was at the mercy of their patron's mood and generosity, making long-term planning as futile as predicting the next royal scandal. Now, contrast this with the life of a traveling entertainer. These jesters were the OG road warriors, hitting the medieval circuit and performing wherever they could find an audience. Forget the glamorous tour buses or swanky hotels. Think more along the lines of sleeping in drafty inns, or worse, under the stars when bookings were thin. These jesters had to hustle for every coin, often performing multiple shows a day just to keep bread on the table. While they enjoyed a bit more freedom than their court-bound counterparts, they also faced the harsh realities of medieval travel. Bad roads, bandits, and the ever-present risk of illness. The economic disparity between a court jester and a wandering performer was stark. While a court jester might occasionally dine on pheasant and wear silk, a traveling jester often had to settle for whatever they could scrounge up. And let's not forget the social hierarchy. Even the most beloved court jesters were seen as mere entertainers, never truly part of the noble circle. Meanwhile, traveling jesters were often viewed with suspicion and disdain by locals, seen as little better than beggars despite their talents. But there were those who found a sweet spot, juggling both roles to maximize their influence and income. Enter Richard Tarleton, one of the most famous jesters of the Elizabethan era. This guy was a court favorite and a public sensation, performing in front of Queen Elizabeth I while also drawing crowds in London's bustling streets. Tarleton was the medieval equivalent of a YouTube star, leveraging his court connections to boost his public performances and vice versa. He even ran his own tavern, a side hustle that modern influencers would envy. In the end, the life of a jester was a constant balancing act, juggling roles, expectations, and the ever-fluctuating favor of those in power. They were the ultimate survivors, adapting to the whims of the court and the hardships of the road. While it's easy to romanticize them as merry pranksters, the truth reveals a life fraught with risk and reward, where laughter was both a weapon and a shield. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover about these medieval masters of mirth. And speaking of uncovering more layers, let's dive into the cultural significance of jesters and the not-so-funny impact they had on medieval society. You might think they were just the court's comic relief, but these jesters, they were the medieval version of a cultural linchpin, holding together the delicate tapestry of social norms and power dynamics with a well-timed quip and a jingle of their caps. First off, let's tackle the social perception of these jesters. To the nobles lounging around in their finery, jesters were a mix of necessary entertainment and a reminder that even kings need a laugh or a fart joke, now and then. But the common folk, they saw them as a kind of bridge to the elite world, a rare peek behind the velvet curtain, where even the highest born could be brought down a peg by a jester's sharp tongue. What a sight it must have been, the mighty brought low by the guy with bells on his hat. But jesters were more than just medieval stand-up comedians. They were cultural commentators, the John Stewarts and John Olivers of their day. At public events and festivals, their role was to entertain, sure, but also to critique. They were the voice of the people, speaking truths wrapped in humor that even the most humorless lord would chuckle at. Because let's face it, everyone loves a good roast, even if they're the main course. These jesters had to navigate the tricky waters of humor and offense, a task as daunting as convincing a cat to take a bath. Now, let's not kid ourselves. There was a dark side to this jester's privilege. The line between humor and insult was as fine as a thread, and crossing it could mean more than just a frosty silence. Take poor Triboulet, jester to King Francis I of France. Triboulet once quipped about the Queen in a way that was less than flattering. The punishment? Death. Yep, one ill-timed joke and boom, off with his head. Though in a twist of fate, the king allowed him to choose how he would die. Triboulet, ever the wit, chose old age, and the king, amused, spared him. But the lesson was clear. A jester's tongue could turn from a tool to a noose in an instant. Economically, jesters were a curious case of contradiction. While their services were in demand during festivals and court events, their financial stability was anything but a guaranteed gig. Picture this. A jester could be lavished with coins and gifts after a successful performance, yet the next day find himself ignored like a medieval version of a one-hit wonder. The social hierarchy was no kinder. Sure, they rubbed elbows with royalty, but they were never quite allowed to forget their place. Forever the entertainer, never the equal. It's like being invited to the party, but only if you're willing to be the entertainment. The impact of jesters wasn't confined to courts or festivals either. They were instrumental in shaping public discourse, albeit in a way that involved more slapstick than statesmanship. In a time when dissent could get you thrown in the dungeon, jesters were the loophole, the court-sanctioned critics who could say the unsayable. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a form of social commentary, a medieval TED talk with a punchline. And yet, not all jesters managed to toe the line successfully. There's the tale of Dickie Pierce, the jester to the Earl of Suffolk, who got a little too comfortable with his liberties. Pierce made the fatal error of marking the Earl himself, a move that resulted in a fatal, accidental fall from a balcony. Whether it was truly an accident or the Earl's version of quality control is up for debate, but it served as a grim reminder of the precarious position jesters held. In these public spectacles, jesters were the ones who could both unite and divide. They had the power to sway opinions, to highlight the absurdities of the time, and to reflect society back on itself, warts and all. They were both a comfort and a cautionary tale, a reminder that humor could be a double-edged sword, sharp enough to cut through pretense, but just as capable of cutting down the jester who wielded it. As we continue to unravel the complexities of jester life, remember that there's more to these characters than meets the eye. They were the unsung heroes of medieval culture, the ones who reminded everyone that laughter might not change the world, but it could certainly make it a more bearable place. So stick around, because the jester's tale isn't over yet, and there's plenty more history to unpack before the final curtain falls. As we dive into the winding down of the medieval jester's heyday, it's worth noting that even the most riotous court jester couldn't quip their way out of history's relentless march forward. The Middle Ages, like an overextended stand-up routine, eventually gave way to the Renaissance, a time when the world decided it needed more Leonardo da Vinci and less fart and Farley in its cultural diet. As political landscapes shifted and emerging forms of entertainment took center stage, our once-beloved jesters found themselves gradually pushed off the medieval marquee. The political climate was changing faster than a jester could juggle his last set of clubs. With the rise of centralized monarchies and the decline of feudalism, royal courts became less of a circus and more of a bureaucratic stronghold. Kings and queens were now more interested in tax reform and territorial expansion than a jester's witty repartee. In an era where diplomacy and cold, hard cash were the new courtly currency, jesters found themselves increasingly irrelevant, like trying to pay for your Amazon Prime subscription with monopoly money. But it wasn't just the political arena that was giving jesters the cold shoulder. Enter the theater. By the late 15th century, the theatrical stage had begun its ascent, threatening to outshine the jesters markedly with the sparkle of scripted drama. The Italian commedia dell'arte, with its stark characters and improvisational flair, brought a fresh gust of laughter to the masses. Meanwhile, in England, the seeds of the Elizabethan theatre were being sown, eventually giving rise to figures like Shakespeare, who could pen a joke that would stick around longer than a jester's punchline. The theatre offered something that jesters couldn't compete with, a narrative structure. Audiences were captivated by stories that unfolded with a beginning, middle, and end, whereas a jester's performance was often as meandering as a medieval road map. As public taste evolved, the jester's role dwindled, and many found themselves out of a job, or at least out of a court. Some jesters managed to pivot, adapting to the changing times by joining traveling theatre troupes or performing in taverns where they could play to the local crowd. Take Muckle John, the last recorded court jester to King Charles I of England. When the English Civil War broke out, Muckle John found himself without a royal patron as the monarchy crumbled. Yet, like any good performer, he pivoted to the pub scene, where his antics continued to draw crowds, albeit without the royal backdrop. Others weren't so lucky. Many jesters, unable to adapt to the new cultural landscape, faded into obscurity. Their names, once whispered in the halls of power, were now footnotes in history. It was a harsh reminder that the jester's craft, much like fashion trends and diet fads, was subject to the whims of the times. Economically, the decline was just as brutal. While a court jester might have enjoyed a steady income and the occasional bonus in the form of manor or a new pair of shoes, the theatre world offered no such guarantees. Payment for performers was often inconsistent, with actors and jesters alike reliant on the fickle generosity of their patrons or the unpredictable success of their shows. It was a gig economy centuries before Uber drivers had to navigate it. Only instead of surge pricing, performers faced the very real possibility of a surge in tomatoes. But let's not gloss over the allure of the jester's life, even as it waned. The appeal was still there, albeit tinged with a sense of nostalgia. The jester represented a simpler time when a well-timed joke could ease the tension of a courtly affair or diffuse the severity of a political debacle. This romantic notion of the jester as an essential courtly figure persisted in literature and art long after their physical presence had diminished, becoming a symbol of laughter's enduring power to challenge and change. The jester's decline didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process, much like watching your favorite band from the 80s slowly fade from the charts. It wasn't that the jesters stopped being funny. It was that the world had moved on to a different kind of humor. The age of the jester was ending, but their legacy lived on, paving the way for a new breed of entertainer, one that embraced the theatrical, the scripted, and the grand narratives that would define the Renaissance and beyond. In this transitional period, some jesters found new life in the evolving entertainment landscape. As the theater grew in popularity, a few savvy jesters capitalized on their comedic skills to become playwrights or actors. Richard Tarleton, for instance, parlayed his court jester experience into a successful stage career, becoming one of the most celebrated comic actors in Elizabethan England. His influence was so profound that even Shakespeare is said to have drawn inspiration from Tarleton's style and humor. Talk about a career pivot. Yet, for every Tarleton, there were countless others who couldn't make the leap from court jester to theatrical star. These jesters faced an uncertain future, their skills ill-suited to the demands of the new world. Some retired, living out their days in quiet obscurity, while others drifted from town to town, performing where they could, hoping to recapture the magic of their glory days. As we draw closer to the final act of the jester's story, it's clear that their decline was not just a matter of changing tastes, but also a reflection of broader social and economic shifts. The rise of the theater marked a turning point in entertainment history, a testament to the enduring power of storytelling and the human desire for connection through narrative. Jesters may have been the original purveyors of laughter, but their time in the spotlight was drawing to a close, leaving behind a legacy that would influence generations of comedians, actors, and storytellers to come. Stay tuned, because the jester's tale isn't over yet. There's still more to explore about their impact on culture and society, and how their legacy continues to shape the world of entertainment today. So don't touch that dial, or in this case, don't close that browser tab, because the final chapter promises to be just as engaging as the ones before it. So, while the theater's proscenium arch was poised to eclipse the jester's cap, The legacy of these medieval merrymakers was far from a footnote in the annals of history. See, jesters, those purveyors of mirth and mockery, left behind more than a trail of laughter. They seeded the very roots of modern comedy. Fast forward to today, and you'll find their influence mingling with the DNA of stand-up comedians, sitcom writers, and even late-night hosts. Consider this. A medieval jester's ability to toe the line between truth and treason is mirrored in today's comedic landscapes. Ever notice how comedians like John Oliver or Stephen Colbert master the art of delivering biting political satire wrapped in humor? They're the digital descendants of jesters, wielding their words like a rapier to poke fun at power while keeping an audience in stitches. They might not be wearing motley, but the spirit is the same. Speak truth, but make it funny. Now, let's talk about the myth versus the gritty reality of the jester's life. It's tempting to view them as courtly jesters who merely tossed jokes like confetti in a royal parade. But the truth is, they were more akin to high-wire artists, balancing humor with a precarious social standing. Their antics were not just for laughs, they were acts of survival. After all, when your job security is based on the mercurial whims of a monarch, you learn pretty quickly that your next joke could be your last. This razor's edge existence is not unlike the high-stakes world of stand-up comedy today, where a single performance can make or break a career. So why does this matter? Well, understanding the real life of jesters enriches our appreciation of comedy as a craft and a cultural force. It shows us that humor has always been a tool for both critique and catharsis. The same way jesters provided a pressure valve in the tense world of medieval politics, modern comedians help us navigate the complexities of today's social and political climates. They reveal uncomfortable truths, provoke thought, and sometimes just make us laugh when we need it most. Economically, the jester's story is one of adaptability and resilience, qualities that are just as relevant in today's gig economy as they were in the medieval courts. A jester's income was as unpredictable as a comedy club's open mic night, often reliant on the capriciousness of their patrons. Yet they hustled and adapted, much like freelancers today who juggle multiple gigs just to make ends meet. This economic through line shows that while the stage might change, the hustle remains the same. Jesters also left an indelible mark on pop culture. Take Shakespeare's fools, for instance. These characters, inspired by real jesters, were far more than comic relief. They often provided insight and wisdom, challenging other characters and the audience to reflect on the human condition. Think of the fool in King Lear, whose jests are laden with truths that cut through the madness of the play. It's a narrative device that has echoed through literature and media ever since. In modern media, the jester archetype continues to evolve, often popping up in new forms. Consider the classic sitcom character, the wisecracking sidekick, or the sarcastic friend. These characters are direct descendants of the jester, providing commentary and levity amidst the drama. Even in the realm of superheroes, figures like the Joker, with his chaotic blend of humor and menace, remind us of the jester's dual nature, both entertainer and provocateur. It's fascinating to observe how the jester's legacy permeates various entertainment genres, proving that humor is a timeless, universal language. Whether it's through a medieval jester's quip or a comedian's punchline on Netflix, laughter remains an essential, unifying force. And while jesters of old may have swapped their bells for microphones, their role as society's mirror is as vital as ever. So, as we close this chapter on the jesters of history, let's tip our hats, or jingle our caps, to these unsung heroes of humor. They remind us that while life may be a grand stage filled with drama, a little laughter can go a long way in lightening the load. And in the end, isn't that what every good jester or comedian strives for? To make us laugh, to make us think, and to make life just a little more bearable, one joke at a time. You wake up in ancient Persia, the morning sun already casting golden light over the grand city of Persepolis. The air is filled with a medley of scents, spices, fresh bread, maybe a hint of livestock, that tell you this isn't some sleepy backwater town. No, Persepolis is the beating heart of the Persian Empire, and today you'll see it through the eyes of its women. Now, if you think women in ancient Persia were just lounging around weaving baskets, think again. They were the unsung heroines of the empire, running households that were more like small corporations. Seriously, ancient Persian women were the original multitaskers, long before smartphones made it cool. They managed homes, which in ancient Persia were economic powerhouses. We're talking about everything from budgeting to logistics, right down to supervising the family's contribution to the empire's vast agricultural and textile production. Let's stroll through the bustling streets where you might catch a glimpse of a woman like a certain artistone, a member of the royal family known for her managerial skills. Her name pops up in the Persepolis fortification tablets. These are clay tablets that give us a peek into the administrative workings of the empire. Artistone and her ilk weren't just managing households. They were overseeing estates that produced goods for the empire, from grain to textiles. And speaking of textiles, Persian women were involved in what you might call a cottage industry on steroids. They spun wool and wove fabrics that would eventually become the luxurious garments Persian nobility loved to flaunt. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, Persian garments were so fine that they were in high demand across the known world. Imagine that, your handiwork being the Gucci of the ancient world. But let's not romanticize it too much. This wasn't all leisurely craft sessions over tea. It was backbreaking work, often done in less than ideal conditions. Yet, it was also a source of economic power and social influence. Women in ancient Persia, especially those in the middle and upper classes, could own property and engage in business, a relative rarity in the ancient world. They weren't just silent partners. They were active participants in the economy. As you navigate the winding streets, you'll see women haggling in the marketplace. Don't underestimate this scene. It's not just about buying groceries. It's a daily negotiation that affects the family's economy. And here's a fun fact. Women in Persia had legal standing to act as agents in business transactions. Talk about shattering ancient glass ceilings. Persepolis itself was a testament to the empire's wealth and the labor that underpinned it. Built by Darius the Great around 518 BCE, this city was a showcase of Achaemenid architecture. And while men like Darius may have had their names stamped on the monuments, it was the labor of countless women that contributed to the prosperity that made such grandeur possible. Their work in agriculture and textiles was essential in supporting the empire's economy, especially considering that agriculture was the backbone of any ancient economy. As the day progresses, you might notice that life in ancient Persia wasn't just about survival or subsistence. There was a rich cultural tapestry woven into the daily lives of these women. Religion was a cornerstone, with Zoroastrianism playing a significant role in shaping societal norms and values. Women participated in religious ceremonies, and while they didn't hold priestly positions, they were integral in maintaining the household shrines and religious practices that were central to family and community life. By now, you see that the role of women in ancient Persia was far from the sidelines. They were the silent architects of economic stability and social structure. They were managers, entrepreneurs, and even diplomats, wielding influence behind the scenes. While the men might have been the face of the Persian Empire, women were certainly its backbone. As the sun climbs higher, casting longer shadows over the city, take a moment to appreciate the complexity and sophistication of ancient Persian society. Women's roles were multifaceted, shaped by economic necessity, social structures, and cultural norms. They were both bound by tradition and empowered by it, navigating a world that was as demanding as it was dynamic. So, as you walk through Persepolis, remember that the story of this grand city is as much about the women who lived there as it is about the kings who ruled. Their labor, their management, and their resilience were as crucial to the empire's success as any battle won or treaty signed. And that's not just history, that's life in ancient Persia, told through the eyes of the women who lived it. Just when you thought you had ancient Persian women's roles all figured out, the sun climbs a bit higher, and we're diving into the realm of education and literacy. Yes, the often overlooked chapter where women in ancient Persia proved they were more than just the background singers in the empire's grand opera. Imagine this, an empire where women were not only managing households and overseeing businesses, but also hitting the books, sometimes harder than their male counterparts. Spoiler alert, Cleopatra wasn't the only smart cookie in the ancient jar. Now, before we go any further, let's get one thing straight. The stereotype that women in ancient civilizations were uneducated and illiterate isn't just a lazy myth. It's flat out wrong, at least when it comes to Persia. In fact, when you dig into the records, you find that Persian women had surprisingly high literacy rates, especially when compared to their contemporaries in other ancient societies. The Persepolis fortification tablets, those trusty clay documents we mentioned earlier, didn't just record economic transactions. They also reveal evidence of women who could read and write. These weren't just royal women either. We're talking about women from various social strata, which is pretty mind-blowing when you consider the global literacy rate today is still only around 86%. Now, why would women in ancient Persia need to be literate, you ask? Well, if you're running an estate or a business, reading and writing are pretty handy skills. Imagine trying to manage a ledger or negotiate a contract without being able to read the fine print. No thanks. And let's not forget the role of Zoroastrianism, which emphasized knowledge and wisdom. It's hard to aspire to wisdom if you're stuck in the dark ages of illiteracy. But here's the kicker. While the literacy rate among women was impressive, it wasn't just about practical skills. Education influenced their social standing and personal agency. A literate woman in Persia wasn't just a better manager or businesswoman. She had a voice, quite literally. In a society where men often spoke for women, being able to read and write gave Persian women a tool to express themselves and be heard. They could communicate in ways that were typically reserved for men in many other ancient cultures. And speaking of being heard, let's talk about the educational opportunities that were available. While it wasn't common for women to attend formal schools, those were mostly reserved for the sons of the elite. They often received private education at home. Think of it as the ancient version of homeschooling, minus the modern distractions of TikTok and YouTube. Instead, they had tutors or family members who taught them everything from mathematics to philosophy. Some of these tutors were even women, further breaking the mold of what we think we know about ancient gender roles. Now, don't get me wrong. We're not talking about some utopian society where every woman was a scholar. This was still ancient Persia, where gender roles were deeply entrenched. But when compared to other ancient civilizations, like Greece, where women were typically excluded from educational pursuits, Persian women were practically running a master class in breaking conventions. The impact of this literacy and education was profound. Women who could read and write were able to engage in correspondence, both personal and professional. They could draft wills, manage estates, and even correspond with the royal court. And speaking of royalty, let's not gloss over the powerhouse that was Queen Parisades, the wife of Darius Roman II. This wasn't just any queen. She was a political strategist, a master of intrigue, and a woman who knew how to wield her education like a finely honed dagger. Imagine the kind of clout you'd wield if you could read a document that others couldn't, or if you could draft a letter that changed the course of events. This wasn't just about literacy, it was about power. And in a time when power was typically wielded by men, educated women were finding ways to carve out their own spheres of influence. Now, let's tackle another myth, the notion that education was only for the rich and royal. While it's true that the wealthier classes had more access to educational resources, there are indications that literacy wasn't entirely out of reach for the less affluent. The Persians understood that an educated populace was a stronger populace, which is why there was a certain level of public education aimed at teaching basic literacy and numeracy. It wasn't exactly a free-for-all, but it was more inclusive than many other ancient societies. As we continue to stroll through the vibrant streets of Persepolis, let's also take a moment to appreciate the role of education in shaping the cultural and intellectual life of the empire. The very concept of education in Persia was intertwined with a pursuit of knowledge that transcended mere practicality. It was about understanding the world and one's place in it, a pursuit that resonated deeply with the Zoroastrian ethos of wisdom and moral integrity. So, as you bask in the mid-morning sun, consider the multifaceted lives these women led. They were managers, artisans, entrepreneurs, and yes, scholars. Their roles were as varied as they were vital, and their contributions to Persian society are a testament to their resilience and resourcefulness. From the bustling markets to the quiet study chambers, Persian women were making their mark in ways that defy the simplistic narratives we often hear. And while we're not quite finished with our journey into the lives of these remarkable women, one thing is clear. They were much more than the silent, shadowy figures of history's margins. They were the architects of their own destinies, navigating the complexities of empire with a savvy that would make even the most cunning strategist take notice. As we prepare to delve deeper into their world, remember that the story of ancient Persia is as much theirs as it is anyone else's. Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started. As we continue our journey through ancient Persia, let's shift our focus from the learning scrolls to the law scrolls. Because if you thought ancient Persian women were just playing background characters, it's time to meet the real stars of the legal stage. Midday might be calling for a siesta, but we're diving headfirst into the legal rights of Persian women, armed with more scrolls than a high-stakes episode of Suits, only with fewer pinstripes and more linen tunics. Now, let's get one thing straight. The idea that ancient women were merely decorative fixtures in the legal landscape is about as accurate as a GPS with a dead battery. The truth: Persian women had legal rights that would make some of their contemporaries green with envy. Picture this: a society where women could own property, manage estates, and even initiate divorce. In ancient Persia, women weren't just shadows. They were casting some pretty formidable ones themselves. Let's start with property ownership. Women in ancient Persia could own land and make their own financial decisions. And we're not just talking about a couple of garden plots here and there. We're talking significant tracts of land, entire estates even, that they could manage or rent out. These weren't just paper rights either. This was real, tangible power. Imagine the negotiations, the contracts, the haggling over property lines. It wasn't just about ownership. It was about control and influence, a way for women to assert their presence in a male-dominated world. The legal texts from this era, like the Achaemenid tablets, show women actively involved in legal transactions. These weren't just royal women with clout to spare, but also those from various social strata, wielding their legal rights like a boss. In a world where the legal system could often be as labyrinthine as a Persian rug design, these women navigated it with the kind of savvy that would put a modern-day lawyer to shame. Now, let's talk about marriage and divorce, a topic that tends to bring out the romantic in all of us. But before you get all misty-eyed, let's bust a few myths. While love might have been in the air, so was practicality. Marriages were often arranged, but that didn't mean women were powerless. They had the right to draft marriage contracts, specifying everything from property rights to personal obligations. And get this, they could initiate divorce. Yep, ancient Persian women could file for separation, and they didn't even need a sleazy divorce attorney in their corner. These divorce proceedings were about as far from the melodrama of a reality TV show as you could get. The process was straightforward, often involving community officials or local priests to ensure fairness. Women could claim back their dowries and retain control over their own property. So, while the notion of a lovelorn lady pining away might be appealing, the reality was that Persian women had practical options to safeguard their futures. And let's not forget the concept of inheritance. The Persian legal system allowed women to inherit property from both their fathers and husbands. This wasn't just a footnote in history. It was a cornerstone of their economic independence. These inheritance laws were crucial because they provided women with a degree of financial security and autonomy. In an era where financial stability often translated to social influence, inheritance was a game changer. Now, while we're on the subject of inheritance, let's toss in some economic context. The Persian economy was a sprawling tapestry of agriculture, trade, and craftsmanship, and women were deeply woven into its fabric. Their ability to own and manage property wasn't just about personal gain. It was about contributing to the empire's wealth and stability. They were stakeholders in an economy that stretched from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Mediterranean. But hey, let's not put on rose-colored glasses. Despite these rights, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The legal system could be a double-edged sword. While women had significant rights on paper, societal norms often dictated otherwise. Male relatives sometimes tried to override these rights, using social pressure or outright coercion. And while women could take legal action, the path wasn't always a straight line. It required tenacity, courage, and a certain degree of cunning, qualities Persian women seem to have in spades. So, while we might romanticize the idea of ancient Persian women as empowered and autonomous, let's not forget the societal currents they had to navigate. The legal rights were there, but exercising them often required a strategic dance around cultural expectations and familial pressures. As we delve deeper into the midday sun, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of these women's lives. They were more than just wives and mothers. They were legal strategists, businesswomen, and landowners. They leveraged their legal rights to carve out spaces of influence and power in a world that wasn't always eager to grant them such freedoms. And so, the story of ancient Persia continues, with women at its heart, shaping its culture and economy in ways both subtle and profound. Their legal acumen was just one facet of their multifaceted roles, and as we journey further, we'll continue to uncover the layers of their influence and resilience. As we transition into the next chapter of their lives, remember that the story of ancient Persia is as much theirs as it is of the kings and conquerors who often steal the spotlight. Stay tuned, because this tale is far from over. Speaking of spotlights, let's pivot our attention from the streets to the palace halls, where ancient Persian women weren't just waiting in the wings. Post-lunch, our journey takes us into the grand corridors of power, where the aroma of political intrigue was as thick as the incense. Here, women weren't merely spectators, but architects of dynasties, wielding influence with a finesse that could rival any modern-day power broker. First up, let's chat about Adossa, daughter of Cyrus the Great and wife of Darius I. If you think being the queen meant sitting around looking pretty, Adossa would like a word. She was the kind of woman who didn't just sit at the table, she set the agenda. Known for her intelligence and political acumen, Adossa played a crucial role in the Achaemenid dynasty's succession plans. This wasn't just a matter of familial loyalty, it was strategic maneuvering that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. She ensured that her son Xerxes ascended to the throne, a move that shaped the empire's future and rippled through history like a stone in a pond. Now, let's not romanticize the courtly life too much. It wasn't all silk robes and banquets. The Persian court was a hotbed of politics, where alliances were forged and broken over dinner. Adossa navigated this complex environment like a seasoned diplomat, employing cunning and charm to maintain her influence. She was a force to be reckoned with, using her position to advocate for policies and decisions that would benefit her family and the empire. If you're looking for a real-life example of behind every great man is a great woman, Adossa's got you covered. But wait, there's more. Swinging the spotlight over to Parisades, another powerhouse of Persian politics. She was the wife of Darius Roman II and mother to Artaxerxes Roman II and Cyrus the Younger. Think of her as the original Queen Mother in the Game of Thrones saga, minus the dragons and ice zombies. Parisades was a master of courtly intrigue, wielding her influence with a deft hand that kept her enemies guessing and her allies close. Talk about playing the long game. Parisades wasn't just a passive observer in the court's political drama. She was a key player, orchestrating alliances and influencing decisions that had far-reaching consequences. She was notorious for her ruthless streak, using poison as a tool of diplomacy, because sometimes a direct approach just doesn't cut it. Her involvement in the power struggles of her sons is the stuff of legends, with her favor shifting between them like tides influenced by the phases of the moon. But let's not gloss over the darker side of this political theater. The court was a place of betrayal and treachery, where trust was as scarce as rain in the desert. Women like Adossa and Parisades had to navigate a minefield of loyalties and rivalries, often having to choose between personal ambitions and the greater good. It was a delicate balance of power, where one wrong move could lead to exile, or worse. Now, why do these stories matter? Why should we care about the machinations of ancient Persian queens? Well, because they challenge the simplistic narrative that ancient women were mere pawns in a patriarchal game. Adossa and Parisades demonstrate that women could, and did, wield immense power, not just as influencers, but as decision-makers. They show us that history isn't just the story of kings and conquerors. It's a tapestry woven with the threads of many lives, including those of formidable women who shaped the course of empires. And while we're on the subject of myth-busting, let's address the notion that these women operated solely within the confines of their domestic spheres. Yes, they were mothers and wives, but they were also strategists and leaders. They had a say in matters of state, influencing policies that impacted the empire's economy, military, and governance. Their roles were complex and multifaceted, reflecting the intricate dynamics of Persian court life. As we meander through the grandeur of the royal palaces, let's not forget the economic context that underpinned these political machinations. The Persian Empire was an economic powerhouse, with a network of trade routes that spanned continents. The wealth generated from this trade was a key factor in the empire's stability, and women like Adossa and Parisades played a part in ensuring that stability through their political maneuvering. But let's also acknowledge the harsh reality. Their power was often contingent on the favor of the ruling king, and the court's ever-shifting sands meant that security was never guaranteed. It was a world where one moment you could be at the pinnacle of influence, and the next you could be out in the cold. It required a blend of intelligence, charm, and ruthlessness to navigate, and not everyone was cut out for the task. Yet, these women thrived, leaving a legacy that resonates even today. They remind us that history is not just a series of events, but a complex interplay of personalities, ambitions, and decisions. Their stories are a testament to the power of resilience and adaptability, qualities that remain as relevant now as they were then. So, as we wrap up our afternoon journey through the halls of Persian power, take a moment to appreciate the layers of history we're uncovering. These women were not just footnotes in the annals of history. They were authors of their own stories, writing chapters that continue to inspire and challenge us. And as we prepare to delve further into the final chapters of their lives, remember that the tale of ancient Persia is far from over. Stay tuned, because there's more intrigue and adventure to come. As the golden hues of dusk begin to cast their spell over the ancient city of Persepolis, let's shift our gaze to the spiritual realm of ancient Persia, a world where women were more than just earthly figures. They were woven into the divine fabric of the cosmos. Now, if you're picturing serene priestesses floating around with incense and chanting, you're not entirely off, but there's so much more to the story. Women in ancient Persia weren't simply spiritual sidekicks. They played roles that were both influential and complex, defined by a tapestry of cultural and religious beliefs. Enter the world of Zoroastrianism, the primary religion of the Achaemenid Empire, which shaped the spiritual landscape, and by extension, the societal roles of women. Founded by the prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra if you're feeling fancy, around the 6th century BCE, Zoroastrianism emphasized duality: good versus evil, light versus dark, truth versus deceit. It was a philosophy that didn't just touch the lives of its adherents, it defined them. Women in Zoroastrianism were seen as integral to the spiritual and moral fabric of society. They participated in religious ceremonies, maintained household shrines, and were custodians of the family's spiritual well-being. But let's not get carried away with the idea of idyllic harmony. While women held significant spiritual roles, they weren't ordained as priests in the formal sense. Instead, they were the unsung heroines of domestic religion, ensuring that the fires of the household hearth, symbolic of the eternal flame of Zoroastrian faith, never went out. Imagine the pressure of keeping not just your home, but your soul in line with cosmic order. Now, here's a twist. The Zoroastrian emphasis on purity and the cosmic battle between good and evil granted women a certain spiritual autonomy. They were expected to uphold moral and ethical standards, which gave them a say in both family and community religious practices. In a society where the divine and the mundane were closely intertwined, this was no small responsibility. Women who excelled in these roles wielded considerable influence, guiding their families in spiritual matters and ensuring that religious observances were meticulously followed. But let's not sugarcoat it. The expectation of spiritual purity placed a heavy burden on women, whose every action was seen as contributing to the cosmic balance. This wasn't just a personal pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. It was a societal mandate, with women bearing the weight of collective salvation on their shoulders. Talk about pressure. Now, while we're on the subject of divine influence, let's not forget the goddesses of the Persian pantheon. Although Zoroastrianism was largely monotheistic, the cultural memory of older polytheistic beliefs lingered on, with goddesses like Anahita holding sway over aspects of life like fertility, water, and war. Anahita was a favorite among both men and women, symbolizing strength and purity. Her temples were places of worship and refuge, where women could seek solace and guidance. This duality, reverence for both a singular god and ancient deities, created a rich spiritual tapestry that offered women a complex but empowering role within its threads. Transitioning from the spiritual to the societal, let's tackle the myths surrounding the legacy of Persian women. It's tempting to paint them as serene figures lost in the sands of time, but reality is far more interesting. These women were architects of their destinies, their influence felt in every corner of the empire, from the bustling marketplaces of Susa to the quiet temples of Persepolis. Their resilience and agency were not just products of their time. They were timeless qualities that resonate even today. Take, for instance, the oft-romanticized notion that women in ancient Persia were mere pawns in a game of dynastic chess. Sure, the stories of queens and goddesses add a sprinkle of drama to our historical narrative, but the truth is that these women were everyday heroines in their own right. Whether managing estates, engaging in commerce, or maintaining religious observances, they were active participants in their society, not passive observers. Let's debunk another myth while we're at it: the idea that their influence was limited to the domestic sphere. While home and hearth were central to their lives, Persian women were also engaged in the public domain. From business transactions to legal disputes, their presence was felt, even if it wasn't always documented by the male scribes of the day. Imagine the countless untold stories of women who negotiated trades, managed properties, and influenced local politics, all without the benefit of Instagram to capture their triumphs. As the stars begin to twinkle over the ancient city, let's reflect on the lasting impact of these remarkable women. Their contributions to Persian society were not just footnotes in the grand narrative of history. They were foundational elements of an empire that stretched from the shores of the Aegean Sea to the banks of the Indus River. Their resilience and adaptability in navigating the complexities of their world are lessons that transcend time, offering insights into the enduring nature of human agency. And as we wrap up this journey through the lives of ancient Persian women, let's take a moment to appreciate the tapestry of history they've woven. A rich, intricate design that blends the personal with the political, the divine with the mundane. Their legacy is a testament to the power of determination, creativity, and resilience, reminding us that history is not just a record of kings and conquerors, but of the countless individuals who shaped the world in ways both subtle and profound. So as you drift off, consider this. The story of ancient Persia is not just a tale of empires and dynasties. It's a story of people, men and women, who dared to dream, to challenge, and to create. And in that sense, their legacy is as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. Sweet dreams. And remember, history is always more than it seems. If you lived in the Aztec Empire, you'd be standing in the middle of a marvel of engineering. Yes, even if you're knee-deep in muck. Welcome to the Chinempa, the crown jewel of Aztec agriculture, where the real magic happens not in grand temples, but in these floating gardens. Picture this. You're not just farming on land, but practically on water, turning the swampy mess of Lake Texcoco into a food-producing powerhouse. It's like ancient hydroponics, minus the LED grow lights and hipster farmers markets. Let's talk specifics. These Chinampas are man-made islands, built using layers of lakebed mud and aquatic vegetation, stacked like a lasagna, just less delicious and more muddy. Each Chinampa is roughly 30 meters long and 5 meters wide. That's about the size of a tennis court, but instead of a net, you've got maize plants waving in the breeze. And these guys were productive. They could yield up to 7 harvests a year. 7. That's more than your modern-day, pesticide-packed farm can dream of. The Aztecs were feeding a population of over 200,000 in Tenochtitlan alone, and these floating gardens played no small part in that. Now, don't get too starry-eyed. This wasn't all sunflowers and rainbows. The reality of Chinampa farming was a back-breaking grind. You're constantly hauling muck, dealing with mosquitoes, and praying the water doesn't decide to up and murder your crops. And that's before we even get to the droughts. Droughts. The unwelcome guest at every agricultural party. While the Chinampa system was genius for its time, it wasn't invincible. When the rains didn't come, the water levels dropped, and suddenly your lush garden starts looking more like a dried-up sponge. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, you've got to appreciate the brilliance of these Aztec engineers. Picture them, not as the golden headdress-wearing warriors you see in blockbuster movies, but as the real nerds they were, obsessed with agricultural efficiency. They understood that to feed an empire, you needed to think outside the box, or in this case, outside the traditional farm plot. They harnessed the natural ecosystem, using the lake's nutrients to keep their crops thriving. This was sustainability before it was cool, my friend. Speaking of cool, let's not forget the sheer scale of this operation. The Aztecs didn't just stop at a couple of chinampas. By the time the Spanish showed up, there were thousands of these floating gardens sprawling across the lakes. It was an agricultural revolution, quietly happening while Europe was busy debating how to get more spices from Asia. The Spaniards, for all their conquistador bluster, were blown away. Hernán Cortés himself wrote about these floating gardens with a mix of awe and envy. Imagine being so ahead of your time that even the guys with muskets and metal armor are impressed. Yet, the chinampas were not just about feeding the masses. They were a political statement, a showcase of the Aztecs' control over nature. In an empire where power was often demonstrated through monumental architecture, these gardens were a testament to a different kind of might, the power to sustain life, even in the face of adversity. It was a symphony of mud, plants, and water, conducted by a civilization that understood the precarious balance between humankind and the environment. But let's not ignore the elephant, or rather, the jaguar, in the room. As ingenious as the chinampa system was, it had its Achilles heel, reliance on a stable water supply. When the lakes shrank, so did the Aztecs' margin for error. It's easy to romanticize these floating gardens, to view them as a utopia of sustainable farming. But the truth is, they were as vulnerable to the whims of nature as any other agricultural system. The Aztecs might have been masters of their environment, but they were not its rulers. And there you have it, a snapshot of the Aztec Empire's agricultural prowess, where every chinampa was a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. As you stand amidst this muddy marvel, remember that behind every basket of maize was a farmer's sweat and an empire's ambition. The next time you're munching on corn chips, think of the Aztecs and their floating gardens, and maybe offer a small thank you to those ancient hydroponic pioneers. But don't get too comfortable. Droughts are on the horizon, and the real test of survival is yet to come. But now we tread into the realm of the divine, where the stakes of agriculture soared far beyond the pragmatic and into the celestial. Welcome to the theater of Aztec ritual, where the line between farmer and priest blurred like a watercolor in the rain. Here, the true battle wasn't just against the whims of weather, but in the cosmic court of Tlaloc, the rain god with a penchant for drama and sacrifice. Imagine being an Aztec farmer, not just tilling soil, but also navigating a spiritual landscape as complex as any political intrigue. Tlaloc, you see, wasn't your garden variety deity. He was the very embodiment of nature's caprices, giving life with one hand, snatching it away with the other. And the Aztecs knew that appeasing him required more than just hope and a well-timed rain dance. It demanded a full-scale production, complete with rituals that would make modern theater directors weep with envy. We're talking about ceremonies held at Tlaloc's mountain temples, like Mount Tlaloc itself, standing at over 4,000 meters high. It's no small feat, both literally and figuratively, to ascend such heights in hopes of divine favor. Now, if you think these rituals were all incense and chanting, think again. The Aztecs went all out. Sacrifices were the order of the day. And no, not the metaphorical kind. We're talking blood, sweat, and tears. Children, considered pure and pleasing to Tlaloc, were often the unfortunate offerings, a grim reminder that the god's favor came at a steep price. And before you recoil in horror, remember this. In a world where survival depended on the good graces of capricious deities, extreme measures were sometimes the only measures. So, what's the economic fallout when the rain god turns a deaf ear? Droughts were the Aztec economy's equivalent of a stock market crash. Think Wall Street, minus the screaming brokers and ticker tape. When the rains failed, chinampas withered, and the ripple effects were felt all the way to the heart of Tenochtitlan. Food shortages weren't just a farmer's nightmare. They were a political crisis. The Aztec emperor, or Huey Tlatoni, wasn't just a ruler but a provider. His legitimacy hinged on his ability to keep the granaries stocked and the people fed. When the empire's stomach growled, so did its patience. But let's not underestimate the Aztecs' resourcefulness. These were no mere bystanders in the face of adversity. Their response to drought was as multifaceted as their society itself. For starters, They diversified their crops, planting drought-resistant varieties like amaranth and beans, which could endure even when the maize faltered. A strategic move, reminiscent of a savvy investor hedging bets with a diversified portfolio. Take that, Wall Street. And while we're on the topic of strategy, let's talk about the empire's trade networks. When local crops failed, the Aztecs turned to their allies, and sometimes their subjects, for assistance. The tribute system, a cornerstone of Aztec political economy, wasn't just about gold and feathers. It was about food, too. Provinces under Aztec control were required to send agricultural produce to the capital, effectively serving as a buffer against local crop failures. It's as if the Aztecs had their own version of an agricultural insurance policy. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Droughts didn't just threaten food supplies, they threatened the very fabric of the empire. The Aztec economy was a complex tapestry of trade, tribute, and agriculture, and when one thread frayed, the whole system risked unraveling. Yet the Aztecs navigated these challenges with a combination of religious fervor, political acumen, and sheer grit. It was a high-stakes game of survival, played out on the grand stage of Mesoamerican civilization. In the end, the story of Aztec agriculture is one of balance, between the earthly and the divine, the pragmatic and the spiritual. It's a testament to human resilience in the face of nature's whims. So, next time you find yourself grumbling about a rainy day, spare a thought for the Aztec farmer, whose very existence hinged on keeping both crops and guards happy. In the world of Tenochtitlan, every drop of rain was a blessing, and every dry spell a curse, a delicate dance with destiny as intricate as the stone carvings of their great temples. But let's not wrap it up just yet. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of this fascinating civilization. There's still so much more to explore in the intricate web of Aztec life, from their political maneuverings to their spiritual beliefs. So, stay tuned as we dive deeper into the heart of this empire, where life and death, faith and survival were woven into the very fabric of existence. Let's dive deeper into the watery world of Aztec innovation, where the real power players weren't just the priests or the warriors, but the engineers with mud under their fingernails. When you're an empire sitting in a valley prone to droughts, you learn pretty quickly that relying on rain guards can be a bit like trusting a cat to water your plants. Enter the Chapultepec aqueduct, an engineering marvel that was less about divine intervention and more about human ingenuity. Stretching over 3 miles, this aqueduct was the Aztec Empire's answer to Mother Nature's fickle moods. Imagine a colossal stone snake slithering across the landscape, channeling water from the springs of Chapultepec directly into the heart of Tenochtitlan. It wasn't just a pipe dream, it was a lifeline. Without this steady flow, the bustling metropolis of 200,000 thirsty souls would have been left high and dry, literally. Built in the 15th century under the reign of Moctezuma I, this aqueduct was a testament to the Aztecs' knack for problem-solving. They didn't just throw stones together and hope for the best. No, these guys were methodical. They used a double-channel system, so while one channel was cleaned and repaired, the other kept the water flowing. It was the ancient equivalent of having 2 lanes open at a drive-through, efficiency at its finest. And let's talk about numbers, because who doesn't love a good stat? This aqueduct could deliver roughly 10,000 cubic meters of water per day. That's the equivalent of filling about 4 Olympic-sized swimming pools every 24 hours. Impressive. Absolutely. This was an empire that understood the value of foresight and planning, qualities that are, let's be honest, often in short supply even today. But don't get too misty-eyed about this engineering triumph. The Chapultepec aqueduct wasn't just a marvel, it was a necessity. The Aztecs knew they couldn't control the weather, but they could control how they prepared for its unpredictability. This wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in a world where nature held all the cards. They didn't just build an aqueduct, they built a buffer against nature's whims. Now, let's wade into the communal waters of Aztec agriculture, where cooperation was more than a nice-to-have. It was the difference between feast and famine. Farming in the Aztec world wasn't a solitary endeavor. It was a community affair, a social glue that bound together families, neighborhoods, and even entire cities. Think of it as the original co-op, but instead of organic kale, you got maize, beans, and amaranth. In a society where the stakes were as high as the maize stalks, everyone had a role to play. The Calpuli, or neighborhood groups, were the backbone of this communal farming system. These groups organized labor, shared resources, and made sure everyone pulled their weight. It was socialism before it was trendy, ensuring that no one went hungry in times of plenty or drought. And let's not forget the Tlatoni, the Aztec emperor himself, who was more than just a figurehead. His job was to oversee this vast agricultural network, ensuring that tribute flowed in and food flowed out. When you're juggling the needs of millions, you need more than a fancy headdress. You need a head for logistics. But let's dispel some myths while we're at it. There's a romantic notion that the Aztecs were invincible, masters of their domain, untouchable by the forces of nature. The truth, they were as vulnerable as any other society, constantly at the mercy of the elements. When droughts hit, even the mighty Aztecs felt the pinch. Their aqueducts and chinempas were brilliant, no doubt, but they weren't foolproof. Water could still run low, crops could still fail, and the empire's pulse could still falter. So why does this matter? Because it paints a picture of a civilization that was both awe-inspiring and all too human. The Aztecs were not gods, despite their best efforts to appease them. They were people, just like you and me, doing their best to navigate a world that was as unpredictable as it was unforgiving. And there you have it. The Aztecs, with their aqueducts and communal farms, offer us more than just a glimpse into their world. They offer a lesson in resilience and resourcefulness, a testament to the lengths humanity will go to survive and adapt. So, the next time you turn on a tap or walk past a community garden, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these ancient innovators. After all, in the grand scheme of things, we're all just trying to keep our heads above water. And with that, stay tuned for more tales of the Aztec Empire, where the past is as vibrant and complex as any tale of survival ever told. So, as we wade deeper into the Aztec world, let's trade our rose-tinted glasses for a pair of reality specs. Droughts weren't just a minor inconvenience. They were seismic events that shook the pillars of Aztec society. Picture the bustling streets of Tenochtitlan suddenly hushed, not by the charm of an impromptu fiesta, but by the creeping specter of hunger. When the rain clouds took a sabbatical, and the chinempas shriveled, you could almost hear the collective gulp of anxiety echoing through the valley. Now, this wasn't just a bad harvest season. This was a full-blown social crisis that could make a modern stock market crash seem like a minor hiccup. The Aztec society, with its intricate social hierarchy and political machinations, found itself in a precarious dance atop a tightrope. The Calpuli, those neighborhood councils that usually hummed with the rhythms of daily life, suddenly found themselves at the epicenter of a crisis management operation. You see, these Calpuli weren't just about organizing block parties and distributing farming patches. They were the unsung heroes of resource management. Imagine them as the ancient version of a neighborhood watch. But instead of keeping an eye out for burglars, they were on the lookout for opportunities to redistribute dwindling resources. When every tortilla counted, these councils became the lifeline, ensuring that even when the empire's granaries started looking like a ghost town, no one was left entirely high and dry. But let's be real. When food scarcity hit, the social order didn't just wobble, it threatened to topple. The power dynamics within the Aztec Empire were as intricate as a spider's web, and just as fragile. The Huey Tlatoni, the emperor, was expected to be the ultimate provider. He was like the CEO of the world's most elaborate corporation, where the currency wasn't just gold and jade, but maize and beans. When the empire's dinner tables were bare, the emperor's divine right seemed less divine and more like a ticking time bomb. And this is where things get spicy. Droughts didn't just bring hunger, they were the unwelcome spark to the tinderbox of social unrest. The lower classes, who typically bore the brunt of food shortages, went about to sit quietly with empty bellies, while the elite dined on whatever scraps were left. Tensions simmered faster than a part of Aztec stew, threatening to boil over into outright rebellion. The emperor and the nobility had to tread carefully, balancing appeasement and authority like a juggler with one too many balls in the air. Enter the pragmatic side of Aztec society. We're talking about dietary diversification, a strategy that was both a necessity and a stroke of genius. While maize was the undisputed king of crops, its temperamental nature in drought conditions meant the Aztecs had to hedge their bets. Enter amaranth and chia, the unsung heroes of the Aztec diet, ready to swoop in and save the day. or at least keep the populace from outright starvation. Amaranth, with its tiny seeds packed with protein and nutrients, was like the quinoa of its day. It didn't demand the VIP treatment that maize did, thriving even in less than ideal conditions. And chia, those little seeds weren't just for 21st century smoothies and Instagram influencers. They were a vital source of energy and sustenance for the Aztecs, who likely never imagined their humble crop would become a future health food trend. The Aztecs also had a knack for trade that would make modern economists nod in approval. When local crops failed, they turned to their extensive trade networks, stretching from the Gulf Coast to the highlands. Think of it as a Mesoamerican version of Uber Eats, but instead of burritos, you got much-needed food supplies delivered to the capital. Tribute from conquered territories wasn't just a display of power. It was a strategic buffer against the whims of nature. Yet, despite their adaptability, the Aztecs couldn't always escape the harsh realities of their environment. The empire's resilience was remarkable, but even the most elaborate system can buckle under enough pressure. Droughts laid bare the vulnerabilities of a society that, despite its grandeur, was fundamentally linked to the land. But let's not end on a downer. The story of the Aztec response to drought is one of human ingenuity and tenacity. It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, societies can find ways to adapt and endure. So, as we leave this part of our journey, keep that thought tucked away. There's more to uncover in the Aztec world, where every crisis was both a challenge and an opportunity for innovation. Stick around as we continue exploring the layers of this fascinating civilization, where history and resilience go hand in hand like a maize plant and its stalk. Now, let's bring it all together, like the final piece of a jigsaw puzzle, revealing a picture that's more than the sum of its parts. The Aztecs, with their floating gardens and aqueducts, offer us a mirror into the past, a reflection of resilience and ingenuity that's as relevant today as it was back then. Sure, they had their guards and rituals, but when push came to shove, they put their faith in human hands and muddy boots. They built systems that weren't just about feeding mouths. They were about feeding an empire's soul. Fast forward to today, and what have we learned? Or better yet, what should we have learned? In a world where climate change feels like Mother Nature's not-so-subtle reminder of who's really in charge, the Aztec story becomes a timely parable. Here's a civilization that understood the value of sustainable practices long before it became a buzzword at corporate retreats. They didn't just talk the talk, they walked the walk, sometimes through knee-deep muck on a chine emper. The Aztecs' agricultural innovation wasn't just a footnote in history, it was a full-fledged chapter on sustainability. Their floating gardens, or chine empers, were a masterclass in maximizing limited resources. Instead of plowing through forests or draining other lands, they worked with what they had, a muddy lake bed, turning adversity into advantage. It's like they were running a 15th century TED talk on eco-friendly farming, minus the PowerPoint slides and applause. The lesson here: sometimes the best way forward is to look down, see what you've got, and make it work for you. Let's not forget the communal aspect of Aztec agriculture. The Calpules, those neighborhood groups, weren't just about communal singing and late-night bonfires. They were the fabric holding society together, a reminder that collective effort often trumps individual ambition. In their world, survival was a team sport. It's a concept that might seem alien in today's hyper-individualistic society, where every man for himself is often the unspoken motto. But maybe, just maybe, looking back at these ancient co-ops could spark a revolution of togetherness in our own fractured times. But here's the kicker. The Aztecs' pragmatic approach to agriculture often gets lost in the shuffle of grand tales and romanticized myths. We love our stories of warriors in golden headdresses, dramatic sacrifices to rain gods, and the eventual tragic downfall of an empire. But the real magic, that happened in the fields, in the muck, where farmers faced the harsh realities of drought and scarcity head-on. The stories worth telling aren't just about conquests and empires. They're about the quiet victories of survival against the odds. So, how do we take this ancient wisdom and give it a 21st century twist? By recognizing that the challenges we face today, climate change, food scarcity, environmental degradation, aren't new. They're the same dramas that have played out since humans first decided to settle down and grow a few crops. The Aztecs didn't wait for a miracle or a messiah to solve their problems. They innovated, collaborated, and adapted. It's high time we took a leaf, or perhaps a maize stalk, out of their book. As we wrap up this journey through the Aztec world, let's leave the romantic haze behind and embrace the gritty reality, because buried beneath the myths and legends is a story of human tenacity and collective action. It's a story that reminds us that while we may not have control over the elements, we do have control over how we respond to them. And that, dear listener, is the real legacy of the Aztecs, a legacy of resilience, innovation, and the unyielding spirit of a people who knew how to make the earth sing, even in the face of silence. So next time you find yourself in a community garden or pondering the next climate crisis headline, remember the Aztecs. Not as distant figures shrouded in the mists of history, but as fellow travelers on the same uncertain journey. Because the past isn't just a foreign country, it's a guidebook, and if we're wise, we'll learn to read it well. In the dusty corridors of ancient China, where the scent of incense mingled with the clang of iron and the whispered schemes of ambitious rulers, a young boy named Sun Tzu was born. It was the 6th century BCE, a time when the Eastern Zhou dynasty was in its twilight years, much like an aging rock star trying to stay relevant. Sun Tzu entered a world that could best be described as a feudal nightmare, with warring states more abundant than tea leaves in a Chinese. This chaotic backdrop was the playground of our future military strategist extraordinaire, a man whose work would eventually outsell even the most viral cat video. Sun Tzu hailed from the state of Kai, located in the northeastern part of what we now call Shandong province. His family, not exactly royalty, but certainly not scraping the bottom of the barrel either, belonged to the lower aristocracy. In those days, being part of the aristocracy meant you were a player in the high-stakes Game of Thrones that was ancient Chinese politics. The Kai state, like its neighbors, was in a perpetual state of who's got the bigger army, which, naturally, made it a breeding ground for military thinkers. The socio-political environment Sun Tzu found himself in was nothing short of a live-action strategy game. Imagine a map littered with small kingdoms, each ruled by a warlord with ambitions as big as their egos. The Zhou kings, once mighty, were now figureheads, clutching onto power like someone holding onto the last slice of pizza at a party. Their authority had dwindled, and the real power lay in the hands of regional lords who frequently threw diplomacy out the window in favor of good old-fashioned warfare. This constant turbulence was the canvas on which Sun Tzu would paint his masterpiece. Despite what romanticized tales might suggest, Sun Tzu did not emerge from his mother's womb clutching a bamboo scroll of strategies. He was, in fact, a product of his times, molded by the harsh realities of survival and the need for cunning. His upbringing in Kai was steeped in the study of martial arts and the classics, where he learned that brains often trumped brawn, a lesson his future treatise would hammer home with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The family environment was a crucible of learning. His father, Sun Ping, was no slouch himself. A minor official with a keen mind, Sun Ping instilled in his son the virtues of observation and patience. This was not your typical father-son bonding over a game of catch. Instead, they dissected the art of war like it was Sunday brunch. It's safe to say that the seeds of the art of war were planted early, in those long discussions over tea, where the young Sun Tzu absorbed the intricacies of strategy like a sponge. Ancient China was a place where ideas flowed as freely as the Yellow River, and Sun Tzu's education was peppered with the philosophies of Confucius and Laozi. These intellectual heavyweights preached harmony and balance, a stark contrast to the discord of the warring states. Sun Tzu's genius lay in his ability to blend these philosophical musings with practical military tactics. He saw beyond the immediate chaos to the underlying patterns, much like a chess player who thinks several moves ahead while the opponent is still figuring out how the horsey piece works. Now, before we get carried away with tales of Sun Tzu the Wonderkind, let's address some myths. Despite what some Hollywood depictions might have you believe, Sun Tzu didn't single-handedly turn the tides of war with a flick of his wrist or a dramatic speech. No, his contributions were far more subtle and enduring. He was a strategist, not a battlefield brawler, preferring to win battles before they even began, a concept as revolutionary then as it is today. The Eastern Zhou dynasty, while a tumultuous period, was also a time of great innovation. The era saw the rise of the crossbow, an invention that would revolutionize warfare. It was a time when chariots thundered across battlefields and bronze weapons were the tools of the trade. This technological evolution played into Sun Tzu's hands as he recognized the importance of adapting strategy to technology, a lesson some modern leaders might do well to remember. Sun Tzu's early life was a masterclass in understanding human nature and the mechanics of power. He observed the fickleness of alliances and the transient nature of success. The political landscape was a soap opera of betrayals and shifting loyalties, and Sun Tzu took notes like a diligent student, filing away each lesson for future use. His ability to distill these observations into timeless principles was what set him apart from his contemporaries. As Sun Tzu grew, so did his reputation. He became known for his shrewd insights and his ability to read a battlefield like others read a fortune cookie. His rise to prominence was not meteoric, but rather a steady ascent fueled by a blend of intelligence, observation, and a knack for turning the obvious into the profound. He wasn't just a strategist. He was a philosopher, a thinker who understood that war was as much about the mind as it was about the sword. Sun Tzu's legacy was not built on the back of grand conquests or epic battles. Instead, it was his ability to articulate the art of strategy in a way that transcended time and culture. His work, The Art of War, is less a manual for generals and more a guide for anyone facing conflict, whether on the battlefield or in the boardroom. This universality is what has kept his teachings alive for over 2 millennia. In the end, Sun Tzu was a product of his time, man who took the chaos of the Eastern Zhou dynasty and distilled it into wisdom that speaks to the ages. His early life in the warring states of China was a crucible that forged one of history's greatest strategists, a man whose ideas would outlive empires and continue to influence the world long after the dust of his era had settled. And as we dive deeper into his life, we'll see how this quiet observer of conflict became an enduring voice in the cacophony of history. As the dust settled on the chaos of Sun Tzu's early life, he found himself in the thick of military machinations, moving from an astute observer to a player in the grand chess game of ancient Chinese warfare. His rise to military prominence was neither a Hollywood montage nor an instant leap to fame. Rather, it was a series of calculated steps, each more daring and insightful than the last. He didn't just stumble upon a battlefield and proclaim his genius. He honed his skills in the state of Wu, where he would eventually leave an indelible mark. Now, let's tackle one of the more colorful tales from Sun Tzu's storied career, the infamous concubine episode. Legend has it that Sun Tzu, in a bid to prove his strategic prowess to King Helu of Wu, turned the king's concubines into a disciplined army. You know, the kind of stuff that makes for a great dramatic reenactment, but falls apart under the weight of historical scrutiny. The story goes that when the concubines giggled instead of following orders, Sun Tzu executed 2 of them to make a point, which miraculously whipped the rest into shape. The moral. Apparently, even ancient myths knew the value of shark tactics. But here's the kicker. This tale is likely more fiction than fact, a dramatic flourish added to amplify Sun Tzu's legend. In reality, Sun Tzu's strategies were more about brains than brawn, focusing on psychological warfare and the art of deception, less about executing concubines and more about executing flawless maneuvers. It's important to understand the political landscape Sun Tzu navigated. The state of Wu was no utopia. It was a realm in transition, nestled in the southeastern part of China, where leaders were eager to flex their military muscles. King Helu, an ambitious ruler with his sights set on expanding his territory, saw potential in Sun Tzu's unorthodox methods. And Sun Tzu, well, he saw an opportunity to put his theories to the test. The state of Wu was surrounded by rivals, including the powerful Chu state, making it a hotspot for strategic innovation. It was a time when the balance of power was as fragile as a porcelain tea set in an earthquake, and Sun Tzu's insights were like a steady hand guiding the pieces. Sun Tzu's first test came when he was appointed as a general. His debut on the military stage was not marked by grand speeches or dramatic entrances, but by a quiet confidence and an uncanny ability to see 10 steps ahead. His strategies, meticulously crafted, were rooted in the idea that warfare was less about brute force and more about understanding the enemy's mind, a concept that was as radical then as it is now for anyone who's ever played a game of chess or watched a political debate. He understood that the most efficient army was not the one with the biggest weapons, but the one that could strike where the enemy least expected. Take, for instance, his famous advice: appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend. March swiftly to places where you are not expected. This wasn't just military jargon. It was a lesson in human psychology, an understanding of fear and surprise that transcended mere tactics. It's the kind of wisdom that made Sun Tzu not just a general, but a philosopher of war, someone who could see the battlefield as a living entity rather than a static map. One of Sun Tzu's most notable campaigns was against the Chu state, a formidable adversary with resources and manpower that could have overwhelmed a lesser strategist. But Sun Tzu wasn't about to play by the rules. He leveraged the terrain, employing a strategy of mobility and surprise attacks that kept the Chu forces off balance. It was a classic case of David versus Goliath, with Sun Tzu wielding his intellect as the proverbial sling. The result, a series of victories that not only expanded Wu's territory, but also cemented Sun Tzu's reputation as a strategist par excellence. But let's not get carried away with visions of Sun Tzu as an invincible military genius. The truth is, his strategies, while brilliant, were also a product of necessity. The state of Wu didn't have the luxury of endless resources. It had to rely on cunning and innovation to survive. Sun Tzu's genius lay in his ability to turn these constraints into advantages, to transform limitations into opportunities. He wasn't just fighting battles. He was redefining the rules of engagement. Economic context played a crucial role in Sun Tzu's strategies. The cost of warfare was staggering, even by ancient standards. Armies required food, weapons, and maintenance, and a prolonged campaign could drain a state's coffers faster than you can say, budget deficit. Sun Tzu's emphasis on swift, decisive victories was not just a tactical choice, but an economic necessity. His belief that the skillful fighter puts himself into a position which makes defeat impossible was as much about conserving resources as it was about winning battles. Yet, despite his success on the battlefield, Sun Tzu was not immune to the volatile nature of court politics. The court of Wu was a hotbed of intrigue and ambition, where alliances were as fleeting as a summer rain. Sun Tzu had to navigate this treacherous terrain with the same acumen he applied to warfare. It was a delicate dance, balancing the whims of the king with the needs of the military, all while ensuring that his position remained secure. It's a testament to his strategic mind that he managed to thrive in such an environment, turning potential pitfalls into stepping stones. As Sun Tzu's theories evolved, so did his understanding of the broader implications of warfare. He recognized that war was not an isolated event, but a continuation of politics by other means, a concept that would later be echoed by Clausewitz in the 19th century. For Sun Tzu, the ultimate victory was not just about defeating the enemy, but about achieving a lasting peace. His belief that the greatest victory is that which requires no battle was a profound acknowledgement of the human cost of war, a reminder that the best strategy is one that avoids bloodshed altogether. In the end, Sun Tzu's rise to military prominence was not just a tale of battles won and strategies devised. It was a journey of intellectual exploration, a quest to understand the nature of conflict and the principles that govern it. His ability to distill complex ideas into simple, actionable strategies was what set him apart from his contemporaries, and it's what continues to make his work relevant today. As we delve further into his life and legacy, we'll see how his ideas transcended the battlefield, influencing not just military leaders but thinkers in every field. The man behind the art of war was more than a general. He was a visionary whose insights continue to illuminate the path to success in an ever-changing world. Stay tuned, as there's much more to uncover about this enigmatic figure who turned the chaos of war into an enduring philosophy. As we unwrap Sun Tzu's legacy, we inevitably find ourselves face to face with his magnum opus, The Art of War. This isn't just a dusty old scroll tucked away in the annals of history. Nope, it's a 500-year-old mic drop that still echoes in boardrooms and battlefields alike. Written in the late spring and autumn period, around 5th century BCE, This slim volume became the tactical equivalent of a Swiss Army knife, versatile, compact, and surprisingly sharp. Now, let's clear the air on one popular misconception that has more staying power than a bad pop song. Contrary to what some might think, Sun Tzu wasn't sitting in a candlelit room, quill in hand, thinking, "How can I help future CEOs boost their quarterly earnings?" His primary audience was military leaders, not corporate climbers. The fact that The Art of War now graces the bookshelves of entrepreneurs everywhere is a testament to its adaptability, not its original intent. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, let's delve into the meat and potatoes of this strategic feast. The Art of War is divided into 13 chapters, each one a succinct treatise on various aspects of warfare. From laying plans to the use of spies, the text covers everything a general needed to know, short of how to tie their sandals. Sun Tzu's first and foremost principle is that all warfare is based on deception. This isn't just battle advice. It's a universal truth about human nature. We're talking about a man who saw the battlefield as a stage and war as theater, where the best performance could win the day. Take, for instance, the concept of winning without fighting. Sun Tzu believed that the acme of skill was to subdue the enemy without breaking a sweat. If you can outsmart your opponent before swords are drawn, you've already won. It's an idea that's as appealing today as it was back then. After all, why go through the trouble of a messy confrontation when you can win with a well-placed rumor or a clever feint? But let's be real here. While Sun Tzu's strategies sound great in theory, applying them in real life can be as tricky as assembling IKEA furniture without the instructions. Case in point, the modern corporate world, where leaders quote Sun Tzu like he's the Yoda of business strategy. Sure, phrases like "know your enemy" and appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend sound profound, but let's see how they hold up when you're trying to outmaneuver a rival company, not a rival army. Here's a wry observation. Sun Tzu never had to negotiate a merger or deal with office politics. He didn't know what it was like to manage a team of millennials or face the existential dread of an impending deadline. Trying to apply his principles to the corporate world can sometimes be like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Effective in theory, but maybe not the best tool for the job. Nevertheless, The Art of War has endured, largely because its wisdom extends beyond the battlefield. Sun Tzu's advice to know yourself and know your enemy is about self-awareness and understanding others, a lesson that's as relevant in personal relationships as it is in warfare. Yet, the nuances of Sun Tzu's teachings are often lost in translation, or worse, turned into motivational poster fodder. Let's take a step back and look at why Sun Tzu's work was such a game-changer in its time. Ancient Chinese warfare was a brutal affair, often resembling a high-stakes chess game played with real lives. Armies were massive, with tens of thousands of soldiers clashing in battles that could drag on for months. Resources were finite. The cost of prolonged warfare could bankrupt a state faster than you can say, economic downturn. Sun Tzu's emphasis on strategy over brute force was a revelation, offering a way to conserve resources and minimize casualties while still achieving objectives. Economically, this approach was a godsend. The cost of maintaining an army was enormous, requiring vast quantities of food, weapons, and other supplies. Sun Tzu's strategies aimed at efficiency, winning swift, decisive victories that conserved resources and shortened campaigns. His idea that the greatest victory is that which requires no battle was not just a tactical preference, but a fiscal necessity. It's worth noting that Sun Tzu didn't claim his strategies were foolproof. He was well aware of the complexities of war and the unpredictability of human nature. His teachings emphasized flexibility and adaptation, recognizing that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. This is a lesson that might resonate with anyone who's ever had a well-laid plan fall apart at the first sign of trouble, whether on the battlefield or in everyday life. So, how did The Art of War leap from ancient battlefields to modern boardrooms? The transition wasn't immediate. For centuries, the text was studied by military leaders in China and Japan, influencing figures from the samurai to Mao Zedong. It wasn't until the 20th century that Western military strategists and business leaders began to take note. The allure of Sun Tzu's wisdom proved irresistible, offering insights that seem to apply to modern challenges, from warfare to Wall Street. Yet, before you rush out to buy a copy of The Art of War to solve your latest office crisis, remember that Sun Tzu's world was a far cry from ours. His insights are not a one-size-fits-all solution. They require interpretation, adaptation, and dare I say, a touch of common sense. While the romance of applying ancient wisdom to modern problems is undeniably appealing, the reality is that Sun Tzu's principles must be tailored to fit the unique challenges of today. In the grand tapestry of history, the art of war remains a fascinating thread, weaving together the past and present in unexpected ways. Sun Tzu's legacy is not just a testament to his genius, but also a reminder of the enduring nature of human conflict and the timeless quest for understanding it. As we continue to explore his life and impact, we'll see how his ideas have shaped not just military strategy, but the very way we think about competition and success. There's more to uncover about this enigmatic strategist, so stay tuned as we unravel the next chapter of Sun Tzu's extraordinary story. As we continue our journey with Sun Tzu, let's zoom out from the dusty scrolls of ancient China to the broader canvas of world history. Imagine his strategies leaping across mountains and oceans, like a particularly ambitious game of hopscotch. While The Art of War was penned with Chinese generals in mind, its influence didn't stop at the Great Wall. No, this little book took off like a shot, weaving its way into the minds of leaders far and wide. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of going viral. First up, Japan. The Japanese samurai were already a force to be reckoned with, but when Sun Tzu's work landed on their shores, it was like adding rocket fuel to a bonfire. By the 8th century, The Art of War had become essential reading for the samurai class. It was their go-to guide, much like a 16th century, how to win friends and influence people, only with more swords and less small talk. The samurai saw the wisdom in Sun Tzu's notion of winning without fighting. After all, who wants to get their armor all dented when a well-placed psychological jab can do the trick? Fast forward to the Edo period in the 17th century, where Tokugawa Ieyasu, the first shogun of the Tokugawa shogunate, was a huge fan. He embraced Sun Tzu's ideas like a long-lost brother, applying them to unify Japan after decades of civil war. His 3-century-long dynasty was a masterclass in strategic governance, echoing Sun Tzu's advice to build your opponent a golden bridge to retreat across. This wasn't just about warfare. It was about maintaining power through diplomacy and careful alliances. In a world where betrayal was as common as sushi, Sun Tzu's strategies provided a kind of strategic glue to hold things together. But Sun Tzu's journey didn't end there. By the time the 18th century rolled around, his ideas had crossed over to Europe, courtesy of the Jesuits who translated his work into Latin. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte, a man whose military ambitions were only matched by his fondness for large hats. Napoleon, ever the strategic thinker, reportedly kept a copy of The Art of War by his side during campaigns. While it's hard to imagine the Emperor of France huddled by a campfire reading ancient Chinese philosophy, the influence is undeniable. Napoleon's penchant for speed and surprise in battle mirrored Sun Tzu's emphasis on swiftness and deception. His famous tactic of concentrating forces at a decisive point was straight out of the Sun Tzu playbook, albeit with a lot more cannon fire. The economic backdrop of 19th century Europe made Sun Tzu's insights even more appealing. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, and war was becoming an expensive affair. The cost of outfitting an army with newfangled technology like rifles and railways was skyrocketing. Leaders needed to win quickly and efficiently, or they'd find themselves bankrupt faster than you can say. Waterloo. Sun Tzu's strategies offered a model for conserving resources while maximizing impact, a lesson that resonated amidst the clatter of machinery and the smoke of industry. And let's not overlook another key player in this global game of strategic chess, the United States. By the time the Civil War erupted, Sun Tzu's ideas had found a new audience in American military academies. Generals like Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee, facing the grim realities of a divided nation, found value in Sun Tzu's principles. The Civil War was a brutal affair, with battles like Gettysburg resulting in tens of thousands of casualties. In this context, Sun Tzu's emphasis on understanding the enemy and avoiding prolonged conflict became more than just wise words. It was a matter of life and death. Now, let's pause for a moment to bust a couple of myths that have clung to Sun Tzu's legacy like barnacles on a ship. First up, the idea that the art of war is a magical cure-all for every conflict under the sun. While Sun Tzu's insights are undeniably brilliant, applying them requires nuance and adaptability. This isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It's more like a toolkit. Second, the romantic notion that Sun Tzu's strategies alone can topple empires. Reality check. While his ideas can guide leaders towards victory, they aren't a substitute for good governance, economic stability, or, actual common sense. That being said, the romantic appeal of Sun Tzu's work is undeniable. His ability to distill complex strategies into concise, poetic aphorisms makes the text not only accessible, but deeply resonant. Consider his famous line, "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity." It's the kind of wisdom that transcends time and culture, offering hope in the face of uncertainty. It's no wonder that, even today, the art of war is a staple in military academies and MBA programs alike. In the grand theater of history, Sun Tzu's impact is a reminder that ideas can have a longer shelf life than empires. His work, born in the tumultuous world of ancient China, has traveled the globe, shaping the course of history in ways he could never have imagined. From the disciplined ranks of the samurai to the battlefields of Europe and America, Sun Tzu's strategies have left an indelible mark on the art of conflict. As we continue to unravel the story of this enigmatic strategist, we'll explore how his ideas have trickled down into modern times, influencing not just military tactics, but the very way we think about competition, power, and success. Stay tuned for more insights into how Sun Tzu's ancient wisdom continues to navigate the complexities of our ever-changing world. As we dive into the modern world, let's pull Sun Tzu into the 21st century, a time when the battlefields have shifted from open plains to the boardrooms and self-help seminars of today. Now, Sun Tzu might raise an eyebrow or two at how his ancient scrolls have been rebranded more often than a pop star on a comeback tour. There's something undeniably appealing about the idea of applying two 500-year-old war strategies to modern problems. It's like using a samurai sword to slice through the corporate red tape, unconventional, but you can't deny the style points. The allure of Sun Tzu's teachings lies in their adaptability. The art of war has become the Swiss Army knife of strategic thinking, quoted in contexts as varied as military academies and motivational workshops. Picture a room full of budding entrepreneurs nodding along as a charismatic speaker quotes Sun Tzu on winning without fighting, making it sound like the secret sauce to outsmarting competitors without breaking a sweat. There's even a cottage industry of books and seminars that promise to teach you how to apply these ancient principles to everything from negotiating a raise to acing a job interview. It's a testament to the universal appeal of Sun Tzu's insights, even if the man himself might be scratching his head at the idea of his strategies being used to sell more widgets. But let's not forget the military academies, where Sun Tzu's work remains a staple. His ideas have been dissected and debated in places like West Point, Sandhurst, and the National Defense Academy of Japan. In these hallowed halls, the art of war isn't just a book, it's practically a rite of passage. The military strategists of today still find value in his emphasis on deception, flexibility, and knowing one's enemy. These principles resonate as much in the era of drones and cyber warfare as they did when armies clashed with spears and chariots. Yet, there's a wry twist to this tale. While military minds study Sun Tzu with the seriousness of a chess grandmaster planning his next move, in the civilian world, his teachings have morphed into something of a self-help mantra. The idea that one can know the enemy has been reinterpreted to mean understanding market competition or even one's own personal demons. Sun Tzu's emphasis on adaptability is now a buzzword for corporate resilience. It's a fascinating transformation, kind of strategic alchemy that turns ancient wisdom into modern gold. But let's not get carried away with romanticizing Sun Tzu as the ultimate oracle for all things strategic. His teachings, while profound, are not a magic wand. In the real world, where the rubber meets the road, applying Sun Tzu's principles requires more than just reciting catchy aphorisms. It demands a deep understanding of context, a willingness to adapt, and sometimes a reality check. After all, Sun Tzu never had to navigate a quarterly earnings report or deal with the fallout from a social media scandal. This brings us to the economic context of Sun Tzu's enduring relevance. In today's globalized world, where businesses and nations alike face unprecedented challenges, the need for strategic thinking has never been greater. Sun Tzu's focus on efficiency, resource management, and decisive action echoes in the halls of corporations and governments. The cost of missteps, whether in business or international relations, can be staggering. Think of the billions lost in failed mergers or the geopolitical fallout from poorly timed decisions. In such an environment, Sun Tzu's teachings offer a framework for navigating complexity, a reminder that the best victories are those that don't require a battle. Yet, for all his insights, Sun Tzu was not a seer. He couldn't have predicted the rise of the digital age or the complexities of modern geopolitics. His strategies were crafted in a world vastly different from ours, where the greatest threat was an invading army, not a cyber attack. Applying his teachings today requires nuance, a willingness to reinterpret, and a recognition that while the principles may remain, the rules of engagement have changed. So, what would Sun Tzu think of his enduring popularity? Would he be amused by the sight of his work being quoted at TED talks and business conferences? Perhaps he'd chuckle at the irony, or maybe he'd be bewildered by how his ideas have transcended their original context. It's hard to say. Sun Tzu was, after all, a man of his time, a strategist who lived in an era of perpetual conflict and shifting allegiances. But one thing is certain. His insights into human nature and the art of strategy have struck a chord that resonates across millennia. Let's wrap up with a sharp observation about legacy. Sun Tzu's work endures not because it offers easy answers, but because it challenges us to think. His principles are as much about self-awareness as they are about defeating an opponent. They remind us that understanding others begins with understanding ourselves, and that the most enduring victories are those achieved through wisdom and foresight, not force. In a world where change is the only constant, Sun Tzu's teachings offer not a roadmap, but a compass, a guide for navigating the complexities of life, whether on the battlefield or in the boardroom. And so, as we bid adieu to this ancient strategist, let's carry forward the lessons he left behind. Let's embrace the idea that strategy is not about rigid plans, but about adaptability and insight. Let's remember that the greatest victories are those won without conflict, and that true wisdom lies in knowing when to fight and when to seek peace. Sun Tzu's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of ideas, a reminder that even in the chaos of history, there is opportunity for understanding and growth. And with that, my friends, we close the scroll on Sun Tzu's extraordinary journey, a tale of strategy, wisdom, and the timeless quest for peace amidst the storm. The island of Crete is home to more than just sandy beaches and Instagram-worthy sunsets. It was the cradle of one of history's most intriguing civilizations, the Minoans. Around 2700 BCE, while the rest of the world was still figuring out how to string two coherent words together, the Minoans were busy building what could be considered the ancient equivalent of Silicon Valley. With their bustling trade networks, advanced infrastructure, and a society that would make even the most liberal of modern democracies blush, these folks were the original overachievers. Now, before we dive into their economic wizardry, let's get one thing straight. The Minoans were not your average toga-wearing Greeks. Oh no, these were the trendsetters of the Bronze Age, living it up on Crete long before the mainland Greeks decided to join the party. They had impressive palaces, Knossos, for example, like the ancient world's version of a high-end real estate listing with running water and indoor plumbing. Yes, you heard that right. While other civilizations were still figuring out the intricacies of the wheel, the Minoans were already enjoying the luxury of flushing toilets. Talk about living in the future. The Minoans didn't just sit around admiring their plumbing, though. They were all about the trade game. Crete was strategically placed smack dab in the middle of the Mediterranean, making it the perfect pit stop for any trader worth their salt. They built an economic powerhouse by dealing in everything from saffron, which was worth its weight in gold, to ceramics that were so well crafted they could have been the ancient equivalent of a high-end Etsy shop. Their trade network stretched its tentacles all the way to Egypt, Syria, and Anatolia, forming connections that were as vital as Wi-Fi is to us today. But let's not forget the legendary King Minos, a name that conjures images of absolute power and labyrinthine intrigue. According to the myths, he was the big kahuna who kept the Minotaur in his basement, a half-man, half-bull creature with a taste for human flesh. In reality, King Minos might have been more myth than man, a convenient figurehead for a civilization that needed a little marketing pizzazz. The truth is, the Minoans were probably less about feeding monsters and more about feeding the economy. Speaking of monsters, let's tackle the Minotaur myth. This creature was supposedly the result of a divine prank gone wrong, but really, it seems more like an ancient PR stunt. Think about it. What better way to keep your enemies at bay than with stories of a terrifying beast lurking in your basement? It's the ancient equivalent of putting a "Beware of Dog" sign on your fence when all you have is a particularly grumpy cat. The Minoans didn't just rely on tall tales. They backed up their mythical bravado with real innovation. They developed Linear A, an undeciphered script that continues to baffle linguists today. It's like they left a cryptic message just to keep future generations on their toes. Their art was another highlight, characterized by vibrant frescoes that adorned their palace walls, depicting everything from bull-leaping athletes to serene nature scenes. These artworks weren't just for show. They reflected a society that prized nature, beauty, and perhaps a little bit of showing off. While the Minoans were busy being the ancient world's version of a hipster commune, they were also laying the groundwork for what would later influence Greek culture. Their societal structures, art, and religious practices left a mark on the mainland Greeks who came later. The Minoan civilization, however, wasn't destined to last forever. Around 1450 BCE, something went awry. Some say it was a volcanic eruption from the nearby island of Thera, modern-day Santorini. Others point to invading Mycenaeans, but whatever the cause, the Minoans faded into the pages of history. In the end, the Minoans were more than just an ancient civilization. They were pioneers who set the stage for future empires. Their innovative spirit, economic savvy, and flair for the dramatic ensured they would be remembered long after their palaces crumbled. So next time you're sipping a saffron-infused latte, take a moment to thank the Minoans for their contributions to the world. It's the least we can do for the original trendsetters of the Bronze Age. The Minoans, with their penchant for innovation, weren't just about saffron lattes and mythical beasts. They were also the masterminds behind some truly jaw-dropping architecture. At the heart of this architectural prowess stood the Grand Palace of Knossos. This wasn't just any building. It was a sprawling complex that could rival your favorite theme park, minus the roller coasters, but with plenty of labyrinthine corridors to get lost in. At its height, Knossos covered around 150,000 square feet, an ancient megastructure that would make any real estate developer drool. Now, let's talk plumbing. While your average ancient city was still grappling with where to put the chamber parts, the Minoans were flushing away their troubles with a sophisticated drainage system. They had pipes made of clay and stone that zigzagged through their palatial grounds, ensuring that waste was whisked away to parts unknown. It's like they were living in the year 3000 BC while everyone else was stuck in the Stone Age. The water management systems weren't just for show either. They were a testament to the Minoans' forward-thinking approach to urban planning. And speaking of planning, let's clear up a few things about that infamous labyrinth. While the myth of the Minotaur and his maze is captivating, the real story is a bit more mundane, yet equally impressive. The so-called labyrinth was likely a misinterpretation of the complex layout of the palace itself. With over 300 rooms, it's no wonder people thought they were in a maze. But instead of harboring a beast, these rooms were probably used for everything from storage to ceremonial purposes. It's like discovering that the haunted house you've been hearing about is actually a well-organized library. The frescoes that adorned the walls of Knossos were as vibrant as a box of crayons in the hands of a kindergartner. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were windows into Minoan life, from depictions of athletic youths leaping over bulls, because why not make a sport out of dodging a charging animal, to serene images of nature and everyday life. These artworks showcased a society that valued aesthetics as much as they did functionality. And here's a twist for you. These frescoes often featured women in prominent roles, hinting at a societal structure that was surprisingly progressive for its time. In fact, the role of women in Minoan society could give even some modern cultures a run for their money. Women were depicted as priestesses, athletes, and even participants in public ceremonies. It wasn't all just men running the show, and this level of gender equality was pretty much unheard of in most other contemporary societies. Minoan women could have owned property and conducted their own trade, suggesting a level of independence that was quite revolutionary. It's almost as if the Minoans were saying, why should the guys have all the fun? While we're on the topic of breaking norms, let's not forget that the Minoans were also pioneers in technology. Their use of materials like bronze for tools and weapons was cutting edge at the time. This wasn't just about having shinier swords. It was about creating a society that could defend itself and trade more efficiently. The Minoans weren't just content with sitting on their laurels. They were always pushing the envelope, whether it was through art, architecture, or societal norms. The economic context of all this innovation is equally fascinating. The Minoans didn't just build palaces and create art for their own amusement. These were strategic moves to attract traders and visitors to their island. By showing off their wealth and sophistication, they were also advertising their prowess as a trading hub. It's a bit like throwing the most extravagant party on the block, so everyone knows you're the place to be. But here's where the romanticized image of the Minoans hits a snag. For all their advancements, the reality was that their society, like any other, was susceptible to external pressures and internal strife. Theories abound about what led to their eventual decline, but one thing is clear. They weren't invincible. Whether it was natural disasters like the volcanic eruption on Thera or invasions by the Mycenaeans, the Minoans faced challenges that even their advanced systems couldn't withstand. In the grand scheme of things, the Minoans were a civilization that danced on the edge of the known world, leaving behind a legacy that would influence the Greeks and countless others. Their architectural marvels, technological advancements, and progressive social structures were a beacon of what's possible when a society dares to think differently. And while they may have faded from the scene, their impact is still felt today, reminding us that sometimes it's the boldest ideas that leave the most lasting impressions. So as we wrap up this chapter on the Minoans, keep in mind that their story is far from over. There's still more to uncover about how this remarkable civilization set the stage for the ancient Greeks and beyond. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Minoans is just getting started. Now, as the Mycenaeans found themselves peeking over the metaphorical fence at the luxurious gardens of Minoan Crete, they saw more than just a society with enviable plumbing and a penchant for bull leaping. They saw a civilization whose cultural riches were ripe for the taking, or at least a little borrowing. And boy, did they take notes. The Mycenaeans, who were more accustomed to robust fortresses than opulent palaces, started incorporating Minoan aesthetics into their own burgeoning culture. Let's dive into one of the most intriguing exchanges, the world of art and iconography. Minoan frescoes, with their lively depictions of nature and ritual, were like the Pinterest boards of the ancient world. The Mycenaeans, not wanting to miss out on the latest trends, began to adopt these artistic styles. You see, in a time when going viral meant your culture spreading across the Aegean, the Minoans were the original influencers. Images of dolphins, griffins, and those famed bull leapers began appearing in Mycenaean art, though with a bit more edge. Think less peaceful nature scene and more bad boy with a sword. But art wasn't the only thing the Mycenaeans borrowed. They also took a keen interest in Minoan religious practices. Minoans had a religious system that was as colorful as their frescoes, featuring deities who seemed to enjoy a good festival. The Mycenaeans, always up for something new, adopted several of these deities and rituals. This wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment. It was a savvy move to integrate and unify different peoples under their expanding influence. After all, nothing says, let's be friends, quite like sharing gods. And let's not forget the linguistic crossover. The Minoans had their mysterious linear script, which, like a cryptic crossword puzzle, remains largely undercoded. It's as if they left behind a series of enigmatic tweets that future generations just can't quite crack. But the Mycenaeans, ever the practical folks, developed Linear B, a script that was more like a bilingual dictionary, translating Minoan concepts into something they could use. Linear B became the backbone of Mycenaean bureaucracy, a tool as indispensable as a well-crafted spreadsheet. Now, Linear B wasn't just about keeping track of grain stores and goat herds, though it did a fine job of that. It laid the groundwork for Greek literacy, acting as the stepping stone to the Greek alphabet. This script was a game changer, allowing the Mycenaeans to document everything from administrative records to inventory lists. It's the kind of innovation that makes you appreciate the power of a good filing system. Without it, Greek literature as we know it, Homer's epics, Hesiod's lore, might never have emerged. While the Mycenaeans were busy importing Minoan culture like it was the latest fashion trend, they were also putting their own spin on things. The Minoan influence was a bit like borrowing your cooler cousin style, but adding your own flair. The Mycenaeans might have adopted Minoan motifs and rituals, but they infused them with a distinctly Mycenaean toughness. Where Minoan saw beauty and ceremony, the Mycenaeans saw power and dominance. It was adaptation at its finest, a cultural remix that would set the stage for classical Greece. But let's pause for a moment and consider the economic implications of this cultural exchange. The Mycenaeans were no strangers to the concept of trade. By aligning themselves with Minoan practices and aesthetics, they were essentially branding themselves as heirs to the Minoan legacy. This wasn't just about looking good. It was a strategic move to bolster their own economic power. By adopting Minoan styles, the Mycenaeans positioned themselves as the new arbiters of Mediterranean trade, a bit like a modern corporation acquiring a trendy startup to boost its image. And yet, for all their savvy, the Mycenaeans couldn't quite escape the shadow of the Minoans. The legacy they inherited was both a blessing and a burden. While it gave them a cultural cachet and a leg up in the world of trade and diplomacy, it also came with expectations. The Mycenaeans had to live up to the Minoan reputation to be not just conquerors, but also innovators. It was a high bar to meet, and while they made a valiant effort, the eventual collapse of Mycenaean society around 1100 BCE suggests that perhaps the pressures of maintaining such a legacy were too much. In the end, the cultural exchange between the Minoans and the Mycenaeans was a tale of admiration, adaptation, and the relentless pursuit of prestige. The Minoans may have been the original trendsetters, but the Mycenaeans were the ones who took those trends and ran with them, leaving a mark on history that would echo through the corridors of time. As we continue to peel back the layers of this ancient relationship, one thing becomes clear. The story of the Minoans and Mycenaeans is not just about what was passed down, but about how those inheritances were transformed into something uniquely Greek. Stay tuned, because this cultural saga is far from over. There's more to uncover about how the Minoans and Mycenaeans shaped the ancient world, setting the stage for the classical era that followed. As we delve further into their intertwined histories, we'll explore how these early exchanges laid the groundwork for the Greek civilization we know and admire today. As we dive deeper into the tale of the Minoans and Mycenaeans, it's time to unravel the mystery behind the Minoan civilization's decline, a drama filled with more plot twists than a soap opera. So, what went wrong in this ancient paradise? Well, for starters, Mother Nature herself seemed to have taken a personal interest in shaking things up, literally. Around 1600 BCE, the Minoans were hit by what historians believe to be one of the most catastrophic volcanic eruptions in recorded history, the Thera eruption. This wasn't just a minor hiccup, it was more like a full-blown volcanic tantrum. Thera, today's Santorini, didn't just spew a bit of ash. It unleashed a fury that was the ancient equivalent of a nuclear blast. The eruption was so massive that it sent plumes of ash across the Mediterranean, likely darkening skies and causing temperatures to plummet. If you think the ash cloud from Iceland's Eyjafjallajökull in 2010 was a travel nightmare, imagine a disruption that could have grounded every ship and chariot for miles. But wait, there's more. This eruption is thought to have triggered tsunamis that swept across Crete's northern coast, wreaking havoc on coastal settlements. Think Poseidon's version of a bad day at the beach. Economically, this disaster was like pulling the rug out from under the Minoans. Their trade networks, which were the backbone of their prosperity, were suddenly in jeopardy. With ports devastated and crops failing due to volcanic fallout, Minoans were facing an economic crisis that even the savviest ancient economist couldn't have spun into a positive. When your main exports are buried under volcanic ash, and your trade partners are more concerned with their own survival, you've got a recipe for economic meltdown. But let's not paint the Minoans as helpless victims of a geological vendetta. There is a rich tapestry of theories suggesting internal issues that might have amplified their troubles. For all their cultural and technological advancements, the Minoans weren't immune to the age-old human penchant for power struggles. Archaeological evidence hints at internal strife, possibly even civil unrest. Palace complexes like Knossos show signs of destruction and rebuilding, which could point to political upheaval or even a succession of coups. It's as if their society was a game of political musical chairs, and when the music stopped, someone always ended up in trouble. Speaking of trouble, let's not forget the Mycenaeans, those opportunistic mainland Greeks who were eyeing Crete like a juicy piece of souvlaki. With the Minoans weakened by natural and internal disasters, the Mycenaeans saw their chance. By the mid-15th century BCE, they began to assert control over Crete, a takeover that was less about a hostile invasion and more of a strategic absorption. The Mycenaeans weren't just content with copying Minoan style. They wanted the keys to the kingdom. The Mycenaean takeover marked a shift in power dynamics that would have made even Game of Thrones look tame. They brought a more militaristic edge to Crete, building fortifications and focusing on a warrior culture that contrasted sharply with the Minoan emphasis on trade and diplomacy. It's like swapping a peaceful art gallery for an armory. This wasn't just a change in leadership. It was a cultural overhaul that would set the stage for the stories of Greek heroics we know today. Now, let's address the myth of the Minoan utopia. For years, Minoan society was romanticized as a peaceful paradise, a harmonious society where art and beauty reigned supreme. But scratch the surface, and the reality is a bit more complex. Archaeological finds, including fortifications and weapons, suggest that the Minoans were no strangers to conflict. They might have preferred their frescoes to depict serene nature scenes, but they were perfectly capable of defending their homeland when necessary. Furthermore, recent studies propose that the Minoans might have faced external threats long before the Mycenaean arrival. Evidence of burnt layers in archaeological sites suggests that raids, possibly by seafaring pirates or rival neighbors, were a real threat. Picture the Mediterranean as a bustling marketplace with a few unsavory characters lurking in the shadows, always on the lookout for a chance to plunder and pillage. The Minoans weren't just trading partners. They had to be vigilant defenders of their wealth. In the grand tapestry of history, the fall of the Minoan civilization serves as a reminder that even the most advanced societies are vulnerable to the whims of fate, whether they come in the form of natural disasters or human ambition. The Minoans weren't just victims of circumstance. They were participants in a complex web of political, economic, and social challenges. And as they faded from prominence, they left behind a legacy both profound and cautionary, a testament to the resilience and fragility of human societies. So, as we wrap up this chapter, keep in mind that the story of the Minoans is far from over. Their influence on the Mycenaeans and the broader Mediterranean world continues to unfold, setting the stage for the classical civilizations that would follow. Stay tuned, because there's much more to explore about how these ancient power shifts set the stage for the epic tales of Greece that have captivated our imaginations for millennia. As we delve further into the legacy of the Minoans, it's hard not to be astounded by how their influence seeped into the very fabric of Greek civilization, and by extension, Western culture at large. You see, the Minoans were the unsung architects of ideas and practices that would echo through the ages. The Greeks, those giants of philosophy and democracy, didn't just spring out of nowhere. They were standing on the shoulders of Minoan innovations, whether they liked to admit it or not. Take the concept of a bustling trade network. For instance, the Minoans had perfected the art of commerce, turning Crete into a Mediterranean hub where goods and ideas flowed freely. This wasn't just about shiny trinkets and jars of saffron. It was about creating a cultural melting pot where different peoples could exchange more than just goods. The Greeks, ever the shrewd learners, adopted this model, transforming their city-states into centers of trade and thought. It's like the Minoans wrote the original script for globalization, and the Greeks took it to Broadway. But let's not get too carried away on a wave of Minoan nostalgia without addressing the myths that persist today. The stories of King Minos, the Labyrinth, and the Minotaur are as enduring as they are entertaining. They've been woven into countless tales, from Greek mythology to modern novels and films. Why such staying power? Well, these stories tap into the timeless allure of the monstrous and the mysterious, a combination that seems to tickle the human psyche in all the right places. The labyrinth, in particular, has become a symbol of complexity and challenge, something that resonates with anyone who's ever felt lost in the maze of life, or at least in an IKEA store. Yet, for all their mythic allure, the Minoans were masters of the mundane as well. Their contributions to art and architecture were not just about aesthetics, they were deeply functional. The vibrant frescoes that adorned Minoan palaces weren't just pretty pictures. They were a form of visual communication, a way to convey societal values and religious beliefs to a largely illiterate population. This tradition of using art as a narrative tool was something the Greeks would take and run with, eventually giving rise to the rich tapestry of artistic expression we see in classical Greece. Now, if we look at the Minoans through a modern lens, what lessons can we learn from their rise and fall? For starters, adaptability is key. The Minoans thrived because they were willing to engage with the world around them, to absorb influences, and to innovate. Their downfall, however, serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of complacency and the unpredictable whims of nature. When the volcanic eruption at Thera hit, it was a stark reminder that even the most advanced civilizations can be brought to their knees by forces beyond their control. In a world where climate change and geopolitical tensions loom large, the need for resilience and adaptability is as pressing now as it was then. The Minoans show us that cultural exchange and openness to new ideas can be powerful tools for growth and survival. Imagine a society that embraced diversity not as a threat, but as an asset. The Minoans did, and for a while, it worked wonders. Economic acuity was another cornerstone of their success. The Minoans built a network of trade that was as intricate as their labyrinth, pulling in resources and wealth from far and wide. This economic strategy was not just about amassing riches. It was about creating a stable foundation upon which culture and innovation could flourish. It's a reminder that economic strength and cultural richness often go hand in hand. Moreover, the Minoans' emphasis on technology, from their sophisticated plumbing systems to their undeciphered scripts, showcases a society that was always looking forward, always pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Today, as we grapple with technological upheavals of our own, the Minoan spirit of innovation serves as a beacon. They teach us that progress is not just about the latest gadget or gizmo. It's about harnessing technology to improve the human condition. And let's not overlook the social dynamics at play. The Minoans, with their surprisingly progressive views on gender roles, offer a glimpse into a society where women were more than mere spectators. They were active participants in religious, economic, and social spheres. It's a potent reminder that gender equality is not just a modern invention, but a timeless ideal that societies have been striving towards for millennia. In the end, the Minoans left behind more than just ruins and myths. They bequeathed a legacy of innovation, cultural exchange, and societal resilience. Their story is a testament to the idea that greatness is not measured by how long a civilization lasts, but by the impact it leaves on the world. As we wrap up our exploration of the Minoans, let's not just look at them as a footnote in history, but as a source of inspiration for the challenges we face today. So, as you close this chapter on the Minoans, take a moment to appreciate the depth and complexity of their legacy. The labyrinth may be a myth, but the lessons are real. In a world that often feels as chaotic as a Minoan fresco, their story reminds us to embrace adaptability, to value cultural exchange, and to strive for resilience. And who knows, the next time you're faced with a challenge that seems as impenetrable as the labyrinth, perhaps you'll channel a bit of that Minoan ingenuity and find your way out. After all, if there's one thing the Minoans taught us, it's that the only constant is change, and how we adapt to it defines not just our survival, but our legacy. You're standing on a dusty plain in ancient Persia, the sun beating down as if it's in a competition to see who can sweat more, you or the earth. It's 500 BCE, and you're part of the elite fighting force known as the Immortals. The name sounds cool, doesn't it? Like you're about to star in a blockbuster movie. But here's the scoop. Being an immortal is less about glamour and more about grueling reality. Forget the Hollywood sheen. It's time to get down to brass tacks. So, what's the deal with these immortals? Well, for starters, the Persian Empire's success didn't just happen because they were lucky. Behind the scenes, the Empire was oiling a massive war machine, and you, my friend, are a cog in that engine. To keep the Empire sprawling from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, they needed a standing army that could stay on its feet. Enter the Immortals, 10,000 strong, each ready to step up when another fell. Sounds like a never-ending game of whack-a-mole, doesn't it? Now, let's talk about the training. You're not just polishing your sword and flexing in the mirror. Oh no, this is Sparta-level tough. The Persians believed in the age-old principle, no pain, no gain. You're out here in the harsh terrain, running, sparring, surviving on a diet that makes modern-day boot camps look like gourmet retreats. You see, the Persians weren't just fighting for kicks. They had an empire to maintain. The cost of losing a battle was losing a slice of that precious territory, and let's face it, nobody wanted to tell the great king they lost his land. Speaking of costs, let's talk equipment. An immortal wasn't just any old foot soldier. You were decked out with a spear, bow, quiver, and that iconic scale armor. This wasn't cheap stuff. The Empire shelled out serious cash to keep you battle-ready. Each soldier's kit was a small fortune. Imagine rocking up to your boss and saying you need a new wardrobe, and they just nod and sign the check. That's the level of investment we're talking about. But why go to such lengths? Why pour so much gold into these warriors? Well, the Persian Empire was a patchwork quilt of different peoples and cultures. To keep this diverse empire under control, you needed a military that could both impress and intimidate. The Immortals were as much a PR tool as they were a military force. A traveling billboard of don't mess with us, if you will. They were strategically crucial, not just for battle, but for maintaining the delicate balance of power across the Empire's vast territories. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the name Immortals. Sounds invincible, right? Like they're some kind of ancient super soldiers who laugh in the face of death. But here's the kicker. They weren't literally immortal. The name came from their ability to always maintain their strength of 10,000. If one fell, another took his place. It was more about perception than reality. The idea was to project an image of an endless, undefeatable force. In reality, they bled and fell like any other soldier. But hey, who doesn't love a good story? And what about the legends that have built up around these warriors? Oh, they're juicy. Stories of invincibility, mysterious tactics, and an almost mythical allure. But when you scrape away the gold leaf, you find a bunch of guys who trained hard, fought harder, and were just as mortal as the rest of us. The romanticized tales are like the Empire itself, grand, impressive, but beneath it all, driven by very human concerns and very human flaws. The Persian Empire needed the Immortals to be more than just soldiers. They were symbols of power, unity, and the might of the Empire. They were the embodiment of Persian military prowess. But while the name and the legends that came with it were impressive, the reality was one of hard work, constant readiness, and a life lived on the edge of conflict. So, here you are, standing in the sun, spear in hand, part of a legacy that will be remembered for millennia. You're not just a soldier, you're a statement. And as you train, sweat, and fight, remember this. While the tales of your invincibility might be exaggerated, the impact you have on the Empire is very real. After all, in the grand chess game of history, you're not just a pawn, you're a piece of the Empire's grand strategy. And that, in itself, is something worth fighting for. And speaking of legacies, let's dive into the day-to-day grind that shapes these larger-than-life figures. Picture yourself waking up before sunrise, not because you've got a morning yoga class, but because the Persian Empire doesn't run on snooze buttons. Your day kicks off with a brisk run, and we're not talking a gentle jog around the block. No, you're pounding the earth underfoot, building the kind of stamina that would make a modern marathoner raise an eyebrow. Why? Because the Empire needs lean, mean fighting machines, not couch potatoes. But what fuels this relentless energy? Spoiler alert, it's not protein bars or kale smoothies. Your diet is a no-frills affair, heavy on bread, dates, and cheese. Think of it as the ancient Persian version of meal prepping, minus the Instagram posts. This diet isn't about indulgence, it's about efficiency. The Empire can't afford to have its prized warriors bogged down by rich foods. They need you nimble and ready to march at a moment's notice. And here's where it gets interesting. This diet wasn't just about keeping you spry. It was about economics, too. Feeding an army of 10,000 is no small feat. The Persian Empire poured resources into ensuring you had enough sustenance to fight another day. It's a fiscal balancing act, like trying to feed a small nation on a budget. Grain supplies were meticulously calculated, with each soldier's ration carefully measured. You were a walking investment, and every calorie counted. Now, let's get real about the training regimen. This isn't a leisurely day at the spa. Your routine is grueling, designed to test limits and forge ironclad discipline. Picture a boot camp on steroids, minus the motivational posters. You're practicing archery until your fingers are raw, drilling spear techniques until your arms feel like lead. The physical toll is immense, but there's a method to the madness. The Empire knew that keeping you in peak physical condition was non-negotiable. It was like being an ancient Olympian, except your gold medal was survival. And here's the kicker. The parallels between ancient Persian warriors and modern athletes are uncanny. Just like today's pros, you're always in training mode, constantly pushing boundaries, driven by a mix of fear, ambition, and sheer necessity. The difference? You didn't have endorsements or flashy sponsorship deals. Your reward was the chance to live another day, and maybe a nod of approval from the great king. Now, about those myths of legendary endurance. It's easy to romanticize the idea of warriors who never tire, but the truth is more sobering. Immortals were human. They bled, they tired, and sometimes they faltered. The legends of their unyielding stamina are just that, legends. Sure, they could march for days and still put up a good fight, but they did so at great physical cost. The Empire went to great lengths to replace and replenish their ranks, more out of necessity than mystical prowess. The discipline hammered into you was both your greatest strength and your fiercest burden. You were expected to stand firm, even when your body screamed to yield. This was the reality behind the myth, the grit behind the glamour. And it's a story as old as warfare itself, one where human endurance is tested to the brink, not for glory, but for survival. The economic burden of maintaining such an army was staggering. The Empire had to be a well-oiled machine, with supply lines stretching across vast territories, ensuring that you had everything you needed to keep fighting. It was a logistical nightmare, requiring careful planning and an extensive network of resources. From weapon production to food distribution, every aspect of your existence was a cog in the Empire's vast machinery. And let's not forget the social dynamics at play. Being an immortal wasn't just about swinging swords and shooting arrows. You were a symbol, a beacon of the Empire's might, and that came with its own set of pressures. The expectations were high, and the margin for error was slim. The Empire demanded excellence, and you were the embodiment of that demand. So here you are, a warrior of legend, a cog in the grand machinery of empire, embodying the paradox of myth and reality. Your daily life is a testament to the relentless drive of the Persian Empire, a balancing act of human endurance and economic prowess. As you lace up your sandals and prepare for another day in the life of an immortal, remember this. While the tales of your invincibility are exaggerated, the grit and determination that propel you forward are very real. And in the annals of history, that is a legacy worth remembering. And speaking of legacies worth remembering, let's dive into the initiation rites that would make a modern-day frat house look like a day at a country club. In ancient Persia, joining the ranks of the immortals was no walk in the park. It was more like a slog through a psychological crucible designed to strip you down and build you back up as a warrior fit to protect an empire that spanned 3 continents. First things first, the initiation. This wasn't about a friendly handshake or a secret password. Oh no, this was about proving your mettle in ways that would have today's HR departments scrambling for the panic button. Think of it as the ultimate test of endurance, loyalty, and fortitude. We're talking about trials that combined physical prowess with mental resilience. And if you thought this was optional, think again. The Persian Empire had a no-nonsense approach to these things. You were either in or you were out. Let's start with the physical stuff. You might have heard stories about running barefoot over hot coals or wrestling wild animals. While these make for good campfire tales, the reality was a bit more pragmatic, though no less grueling. Candidates were subjected to intense physical challenges that pushed their limits. The idea was to simulate the harshest conditions you might face on the battlefield. You'd be running long distances, engaging in combat drills, and surviving on minimal rations. It's like being on a never-ending episode of Survivor, but with higher stakes. But the physical trials were just the warm-up. The real kicker was the psychological gauntlet. You see, being an immortal wasn't just about muscle and might. It was about having the mental fortitude to endure the unendurable. The Empire needed soldiers who wouldn't crack under pressure. So, initiates were subjected to isolation, sleep deprivation, and intense scrutiny from their superiors. The goal, to weed out those who might buckle when the going got tough. It was a brutal form of quality control, but in the high-stakes world of ancient warfare, there was no room for error. Now, you might be wondering why anyone would put themselves through such an ordeal. The answer lies in the social and political pressures of the time. Being an immortal wasn't just a job. It was a status symbol. It was a ticket to a life of relative privilege and prestige, a chance to rise above the common soldier and serve directly under the great king himself. The Empire dangled this carrot in front of recruits, knowing full well that the allure of power and honor would drive them to endure whatever trials were thrown their way. And let's not forget the role of these initiation rites as tools of control. By putting candidates through such rigorous tests, the Persian Empire ensured that only the most dedicated and resilient individuals made it into their ranks. It was a way of maintaining discipline and loyalty, creating a brotherhood bonded by shared experience and hardship. But here's the kicker. The whole notion of brotherhood was often more myth than reality. Sure, there was camaraderie, but the harsh truth was that the bonds forged in the crucible of initiation were just as likely to be broken by the brutal demands of war. Historical records paint a less glamorous picture of warrior brotherhood, while stories abound of immortals fighting side by side with unwavering loyalty. The reality was often more complicated. In an empire as vast as Persia, soldiers came from diverse backgrounds and cultures. Language barriers, cultural differences, and personal rivalries often simmered beneath the surface. It wasn't uncommon for tensions to flare, and the image of a unified brotherhood would sometimes fracture under the strain of battle. Let's talk about loyalty. In the harsh landscape of ancient Persia, loyalty wasn't just expected, it was demanded, and the empire had ingenious ways of ensuring it. The constant threat of being replaced kept soldiers on their toes. Remember, the immortals were famed for their ability to maintain their number at 10,000, no matter the losses. This wasn't just a military tactic, it was a psychological one. The knowledge that you could be easily replaced if you faltered kept soldiers in line, driven by the fear of losing their place in the ranks and the prestige that came with it. The political pressures didn't stop there. The Persian Empire was a vast patchwork of conquered territories, each with its own customs and loyalties. The immortals weren't just soldiers, they were ambassadors of Persian power, expected to project strength and unity wherever they went. This role came with immense pressure, as any sign of weakness could embolden rebellious territories to rise up. The empire's stability depended on maintaining the facade of an unbreakable military force, and the immortals were the tip of that spear. So, as you lace up your sandals and prepare for another day in the life of an immortal, remember this. The legends of unyielding loyalty and brotherhood might make for good stories, but the reality was a complex web of social and political dynamics. The initiation rites and the trials you face aren't just about creating warriors. They're about maintaining control and projecting power. In the grand scheme of history, you're not just a soldier. You're a symbol of the empire's might, a cog in the intricate machinery of Persian dominance. As you stand ready to face whatever challenges come your way, keep in mind the delicate balance of myth and reality that defines your existence. The glory of being an immortal is tempered by the harsh truths of life as a warrior in ancient Persia. But in the annals of history, it's this very complexity that makes your story worth telling. So, steel yourself for the trials ahead, knowing that you're part of a legacy that will echo through the ages. And as you march into battle, remember, in the high-stakes world of empire building, every step you take is a testament to the grit and determination that define the immortals. As you march into battle, spear in hand, and the weight of history on your shoulders, let's shift our focus from the trials of initiation to the nitty-gritty of Persian battlefield strategies. We're diving headfirst into the clamor of ancient warfare, where technology wasn't just a fancy buzzword, but a game-changer. Picture this. Chariots rolling like ancient tanks across the battlefield, and archers turning the sky into a storm of arrows. It's the sort of thing that would make a modern military strategist do a double take. Let's start with those chariots, the roaring engines of Persian warfare. These weren't just any chariots. They were the Formula One of the ancient world. Picture a two-wheeled platform pulled by a pair of horses and driven by a warrior who probably had the swagger of a rock star. Chariots in Persia were primarily used for shock value, charging into enemy lines to break their ranks. The psychological effect was immense, like seeing a wave of metal and hooves bearing down on you. The Achaemenid Persians employed these chariots with cunning precision, using them to scatter enemy troops, making it easier for the infantry to clean up the mess. But here's where the rubber meets the road, or rather, the wheel meets the dust. Chariots were only effective on flat, open terrain. Any rocks, hills, or soggy ground, and you might as well be riding a shopping cart through a mud pit. This limitation meant that the Persians had to be choosy about where they deployed their chariots. Not exactly the all-terrain vehicles of their day, but when the conditions were right, they made quite the impact. Now, about those archers. Persian archers weren't just shooting for fun, they were the real deal. Armed with composite bows, these warriors could hit targets from up to 300 meters away. That's 3 football fields back-to-back. The bows were a technological marvel, crafted from layers of wood, horn, and sinew. This gave them the flexibility and power to send arrows soaring over enemy defenses. It's no wonder that archers were a key component of Persian military might. These guys could rain down terror without ever having to look their foes in the eye. However, maintaining a technologically advanced army like the Persians wasn't all sunshine and roses. For one, equipping thousands of soldiers with top-of-the-line gear wasn't cheap. Those chariots and bows came with a hefty price tag, not to mention the cost of training soldiers to use them effectively. The Empire had to invest heavily in infrastructure and logistics to keep the war machine running smoothly. Supply lines stretched across thousands of kilometers, feeding and arming an army that could be deployed anywhere from Egypt to India at a moment's notice. It was like running a multinational corporation, but instead of quarterly profits, you measured success in conquered territories. And speaking of logistics, let's talk about the economy of warfare. Keeping an army battle-ready wasn't just about paying for the fancy equipment. It was about ensuring a steady flow of resources. The Persians had to master the art of logistics, ensuring that their soldiers had enough food, weapons, and supplies to stay in fighting condition. The Empire utilized a vast network of supply routes, with relay stations and storage depots strategically placed to keep the army's needs met. This level of organization was no small feat and required an intricate understanding of geography, resource management, and human psychology. But here's where things get really interesting. Despite their technological prowess and logistical genius, the Persians weren't invincible. The narrative of Persian overconfidence is a juicy one, often painted with broad strokes in historical accounts. Take the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE. The Persians, led by Darius I, thought they could steamroll the Greeks with sheer numbers and superior technology. Spoiler alert, they thought wrong. The Greeks, with their phalanx formations and home field advantage, handed the Persians a humiliating defeat. It was a classic case of David versus Goliath, and the mighty Persian war machine learned a harsh lesson in underestimating their opponents. The Greeks knew how to exploit the Persian reliance on technology and terrain. Luring them into unfavorable conditions, they neutralized the chariots and archers, forcing the Persians into close combat where the Greek hoplites excelled. It was a masterclass in turning an enemy's strengths into weaknesses, a tactic that would echo throughout history in countless battles. The story of Persian warfare is one of contrasts, technological brilliance and logistical mastery on one side, and the harsh realities of overconfidence and strategic blunders on the other. In the grand tapestry of history, the Persians were both the architects of their own success and, occasionally, their own downfall. It's a narrative filled with triumphs and tribulations, victories and defeats, each adding a new layer to the complex legacy of the empire. As we delve deeper into the annals of Persian warfare, remember that the myths and legends, while captivating, often gloss over the gritty details. The real story is one of human ingenuity and fallibility, of strategies that dazzled and failed, and of an empire that, for all its might, was still bound by the same rules of warfare that govern battles to this day. So, as you stand amidst the dust and din of ancient combat, take a moment to appreciate the delicate dance of tactics and technology, ambition and reality. It's a story that continues to resonate, reminding us that even the greatest empires must reckon with the unpredictable tides of war. And as we prepare to explore the next chapter in this epic tale, remember, the real magic lies not just in the victories, but in the lessons learned from defeat. Stay tuned, because the story of the Persian Empire isn't over yet. And just like that, we find ourselves at a crossroads in the grand saga of the Persian Empire, where the sun started to set on what was once a military colossus. It's a bit like watching your favorite rock band try to keep up with changing music tastes. Eventually, even the most epic legends have to face the facts. So, let's dig into what led to the Persian military's decline, and why it wasn't just the Greeks and their phalanxes that did them in. First off, let's talk about the internal chaos that was like a series of bad sequels to a blockbuster hit. The Persian Empire, for all its grandeur, was more like a patchwork quilt than a uniform tapestry. It stretched from present-day Turkey to the fringes of India, an empire so vast that it had more time zones than a global corporation. But with that size came a slew of logistical nightmares. Keeping the empire stitched together was a Herculean task, akin to managing a multinational company without the luxury of email or conference calls. The empire was a veritable United Nations of the ancient world, with its myriad cultures, languages, and local loyalties. This diversity was both a strength and a flaw, as local revolts and power struggles became as common as sandstorms in the desert. Now, let's not ignore the economic strain of running such a colossal machine. The cost of maintaining those chariots, bows, and the lavish lifestyles of the Persian elite was akin to burning through gold faster than a high roller in Vegas. The Persian economy, heavily reliant on its vast trade networks and tributes from conquered lands, was like a house of cards, impressive, but one gust of wind or a series of costly wars could send it tumbling. The constant need for resources to support a standing army, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, was a drain. When the coffers started to run dry, the empire's once indomitable war machine began to creak and groan under the weight of its own ambition. Externally, the Persian Empire faced a growing list of adversaries eager to take a swing at the big guy on the block. Enter Alexander the Great, the Macedonian upstart with a penchant for conquest and a knack for military genius. In 334 BCE, Alexander launched his campaign against the Persian Empire, one that would see the tables turn in dramatic fashion. The Battle of Issus in 333 BCE was a turning point. Despite being outnumbered, Alexander's forces handed Darius Roman III a defeat that was more embarrassing than a toga malfunction at the Olympics. It was a classic case of strategy trumping sheer numbers, with Alexander using the terrain and his nimble phalanx formations to outmaneuver the cumbersome Persian forces. But let's not just pin it all on Alexander's brilliance. The Persians were also victims of their own hubris. The belief that they were invincible, fueled by centuries of dominance, led to a dangerous underestimation of their adversaries. They were like heavyweight champions who forgot that the scrappy underdog can sometimes land a knockout punch. The overconfidence was palpable, and it blinded them to the evolving tactics and innovations of their enemies. So what happened next? Well, the Persian Empire didn't just disappear overnight. It was more of a slow fade, a series of defeats and rebellions that chipped away at its foundations. By the time Alexander had marched through Asia Minor, the Persian Empire was ripe for the taking, its leadership fractured, and its military stretched thin. Now, let's take a step back and consider the long-term impacts of Persian military practices. Their approach to warfare, with its emphasis on combined arms and strategic mobility, influenced countless empires that followed. The Romans, for example, took notes from the Persian playbook, refining and adapting it to suit their own needs. The concept of a professional standing army, as exemplified by the Immortals, became a staple for future empires that understood the need for a reliable fighting force. However, the romantic image of the Persian warrior endured, shaped by tales of valiant battles and indomitable spirit. It's the kind of story that gets passed down through the ages, polished and embellished like a family heirloom. But let's not kid ourselves. The reality was a lot grittier. These warriors lived harsh lives, driven by duty and necessity rather than glory. The legends are captivating, sure, but they often gloss over the blood, sweat, and tears that define the day-to-day existence of an immortal. And what lessons can modern societies glean from this storied past? For one, the Persian Empire's tale serves as a cautionary reminder of the perils of overextension and complacency. No matter how mighty an empire or a corporation may seem, ignoring the internal cracks can lead to its undoing. There's also a lesson in adaptation. The ability to learn from defeats and adjust tactics is crucial for survival in any era. In the end, the Persian Empire's story is one of grandeur and decline, innovation and hubris. It's a saga that echoes through history, reminding us of the delicate balance between power and vulnerability. So, as we close the chapter on the Persian military's rise and fall, remember that the legacy of these warriors is a tapestry of myth and reality, a testament to human resilience and the ever-turning wheel of history. And as you drift off, perhaps you'll dream of those ancient battlefields where chariots rolled and archers loosed their arrows into the sky, a world where even the mightiest empires must eventually bow to the inexorable march of time. Ever wondered what it's like to wake up in ancient Athens? Well, let's set the scene. It's 400 BCE, and the sun's just cracked over the horizon, spilling light over the city that's more talkative than a modern-day group chat. You're a philosopher, not the kind with a long beard and a robe, at least not all the time, but a thinker, a ponderer, and possibly a bit of a procrastinator, considering your to-do list of existential questions. Now, forget any romantic notions of sipping wine under olive trees while contemplating the mysteries of the universe. Sure, there's time for that later, but first, let's get to the nitty-gritty of your day. Your morning routine kicks off not with a quick scroll through social media, but with the bustling sounds of the agora. Picture this, a marketplace sprawling with characters who, much like you, are trying to make sense of this chaotic world. It's a place where ideas are traded as freely as goods, a philosophical flea market, if you will. But before you even step foot into this intellectual circus, there's the matter of breakfast. Forget about eggs or toast. Instead, you're likely starting your day with something simple yet satisfying. Barley bread dipped in olive oil, perhaps accompanied by olives or figs if you're feeling extravagant. And coffee, not in this timeline. Instead, you might sip on some watered-down wine to kickstart your philosophical musings. It's no frappuccino, but it'll do. As you make your way to the agora, you weave through a labyrinth of narrow streets lined with houses that seem to huddle together for warmth in the cool morning air. The air is thick with the scent of cooking fires, and the chatter of Athenians already deep in debate. You pass by artisans setting up their stalls, each hoping to catch the eye of passers-by with their wares. The agora isn't just the heart of commerce. It's the epicenter of ideas where rhetoric and reason duel daily. And here's where the myth-busting begins. The idea of philosophers as aloof, robe-wearing sages is about as accurate as believing modern-day influencers never take a bad selfie. Sure, some philosophers, like Socrates, wore simple garments, but that wasn't so much a fashion statement as a philosophical one. Living the examined life didn't require fancy threads. In reality, many philosophers were just regular folks with a penchant for pondering and the occasional debate-induced headache. Once in the agora, you might find yourself caught up in a heated discussion about the nature of the universe with a fellow thinker. The stakes, not much more than bragging rights and the satisfaction of intellectual conquest. But these debates are more than idle chatter. They are the lifeblood of Athenian society, where even the sharpest minds wrestle with questions that, let's face it, still keep us awake at night. What's the meaning of life? What's a good life? And why does it feel like the universe has a cosmic sense of humor? Speaking of humor, the philosophers of your day were no strangers to a good laugh, often using wit to dissect arguments and expose fallacies. Consider Diogenes of Sinope, who famously wandered Athens with a lantern in broad daylight, claiming to be looking for an honest man. He was the original troll, poking fun at societal norms and challenging people to rethink their values. It's a good reminder that philosophy isn't all solemnity and stone tablets. It's a living, breathing, occasionally mischievous pursuit. Philosophers were also pragmatists when it came to survival. While you might not be rolling in drachmas, there are no student loans to worry about either. The economic backdrop of Athens is a mixed bag. Democracy is in full swing, and the city-state is a hub of trade and culture. But it's also a place where the wealth gap is about as wide as the philosophical debates are deep. As a philosopher, You might supplement your income by teaching, riding, or even engaging in public speaking. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a side hustle, minus the Wi-Fi. And let's not forget the political climate. Athens is a democracy, sure, but not the kind where everyone gets a say. Women, slaves, and foreigners are all excluded from political life, leaving a select group of freeborn male citizens to shape the fate of the city. It's a system that seems progressive by ancient standards, but would have modern-day democracy advocates shaking their heads. Your day might also include a jaunt to the gymnasium, not just to flex your muscles, but to flex your mind. These are the social clubs of the ancient world, where the physical and intellectual meet. You'll find yourself engaging in discussions ranging from ethics to metaphysics, all while working on your discus throw. It's philosophy and fitness in one neat package, long before CrossFit thought it was cool. By now, the sun is high in the sky, and the city is alive with the sounds of merchants hawking their goods and citizens engaging in the democratic process. You might break for a midday meal, perhaps some fish with a side of lentils if you're feeling particularly health conscious. And yes, the watered-down wine makes another appearance. Hydration is key, after all. As the day winds down, you might find yourself in a symposium, a drinking party where the wine flows as freely as the conversation. These gatherings are the intellectual salons of the ancient world, where ideas are exchanged, alliances are forged, and sometimes egos are bruised. You'll debate everything from politics to poetry, with a few scandalous anecdotes thrown in for good measure. It's part intellectual pursuit, part social networking event, and part ancient reality show. And thus, as the stars begin to dart the Athenian sky, you retire to your modest home, your mind buzzing with the day's debates and discoveries. You've wrestled with the big questions, enjoyed a laugh or two, and perhaps even inched closer to some semblance of understanding. As you lay down, the existential dread might creep back in, but hey, that's just part of the philosopher's life. Tomorrow, the agora awaits with new debates and old questions, and you wouldn't have it any other way. But before you drift off into philosophical dreams, let's talk about the less glamorous side of being a philosopher, the economics. Yes, even in ancient Athens, money made the world, or at least the agora, go round. So, what does it cost to live the philosopher's life? And how do you keep the drachmas flowing without selling your intellectual soul to the highest bidder? First up, let's tackle the elephant in the room, scrolls. These aren't just scraps of papyrus you pick up at the local marketplace like a pack of gum. No, sir. A single scroll, depending on its content and quality, could set you back anywhere from a few drachmas to a small fortune. In today's money, think of it as buying a textbook that costs as much as your rent. And if you're an avid reader, or, heaven forbid, a rider, you'd better start sweet-talking some wealthy patrons or get comfortable with the idea of a second toga. Speaking of togas, or rather, chittens in our Greek setting, clothing wasn't cheap either. A decent chiton might cost you a drachma or two, but if you're aiming to impress at the next symposium, you might shell out upwards of 5 drachmas for a nicer one. That's roughly a week's wages for a skilled worker. So, unless you're a fan of the minimalist look, budgeting for attire is as crucial as budgeting for scrolls. Now, let's talk patronage. The relationship between philosophers and wealthy patrons was a bit like today's venture capitalism, but with less talk about disruptive tech and more about disruptive ideas. Wealthy Athenians would fund philosophers, offering them a roof over their heads, food, and occasionally a stipend. In return, philosophers would enlighten, entertain, or simply flatter their benefactors. This was great, until the patrons decided they didn't like where your ideas were heading, especially if those ideas started questioning the status quo that kept them comfortably wealthy. Take Socrates, for instance. He wasn't in it for the money, but his method of questioning everything made him a few enemies among the elite. The Athenian government, eager to maintain its fragile grip on power, eventually decided his ideas were more expensive than their worth, and handed him a death sentence over a stipend increase. Talk about harsh performance reviews. Of course, not every philosopher ended up on trial. Many navigated the economic landscape with the skill of Odysseus dodging Cyclops. They balanced teaching gigs, wrote for wealthy students, and occasionally engaged in public speaking. These gigs were less like TED talks and more like philosophical stand-up, where you'd better be ready to handle hecklers. The flip side of this patronage system was the loss of intellectual freedom. Philosophers sometimes had to tailor their teachings to suit the whims of their patrons. If your patron thought the gods were a swell idea, you might have to tread lightly around any discussions of atheism. It was a delicate dance, ensuring your ideas weren't too radical or too dull, a balance between keeping your patron's favor and maintaining your integrity. The wider economic context of Athens didn't make things any easier. The city was a bustling hub of trade, but it was also a place where the wealth gap was as striking as a marble statue of Zeus. Landowners and merchants lived in relative comfort, while the lower classes, including many philosophers, navigated a precarious existence. The democratic ideals of Athens extended only so far as your wallet allowed. If you weren't part of the economic elite, your voice had about as much weight as a feather in a brisk Aegean breeze. For a philosopher, this economic reality meant constant hustle. It wasn't enough to have groundbreaking ideas. You needed to package them in a way that appealed to those holding the purse strings. It was a precarious balance of challenging the status quo while ensuring your next meal wasn't in jeopardy. The agora, for its part, was the perfect microcosm of this economic dance. It wasn't just a place of ideas, but a bustling marketplace of goods and services. Philosophers, just like artisans and merchants, needed to peddle their wares, except their wares were thoughts and theories, and their customers were the curious and the skeptical alike. As evening rolled in, you'd find the agora winding down, but the philosophical debates continued elsewhere, often in the homes of the wealthy or in the gymnasiums where the social elite gathered. Here, you might get a chance to woo potential patrons, or at the very least, ensure your name stayed relevant among the city's thinkers and doers. And then, as the stars began their nightly vigil over Athens, you'd head back home, feeling the weight of both the day's conversations and the economic realities of your chosen path. Tomorrow would bring new debates and new opportunities to balance the precarious scales of philosophy and finance. For now, though, sleep beckoned, a brief respite before the cycle began anew. Now, as you drift off under the Athenian stars, let's venture into the thick of it, the social dynamics and political climate that made ancient Athens a philosophical pressure cooker. Ever thought about how risky it is to tweet your hardest take today? Well, back in 400 BCE, opening your mouth could lead to more than just losing followers. It could mean losing your entire citizen status. Welcome to Athens, where speaking your mind was the original high-stakes game. The agora, that bustling hub we love, was more than a philosophical flea market. It was the ancient equivalent of the public square, courtroom, and social media timeline all rolled into one. Here, ideas weren't just exchanged. They were tested and sometimes brutally dissected. It was a place where reputations were built or destroyed faster than you can say Platonic dialogue. But let's not kid ourselves. The agora was as much about social dynamics as it was about intellectual discourse. Picture this. A space buzzing with merchants, artisans, and yes, philosophers, all jostling not just for physical space, but for intellectual dominance. It was a veritable battlefield of words, where rhetoric was your sharpest weapon and intelligence your best armor. Yet, in this arena, the stakes were as real as they come. An ill-timed or poorly received argument could see you socially ostracized faster than you could utter eureka. And speaking of ostracism, let's debunk a myth or two. The romantic notion of the philosopher as the lone, misunderstood genius isn't entirely accurate here. Sure, some thinkers were ahead of their time, but the reality was that they operated in a society where being too radical could get you exiled, literally. Ostracism was a political process in Athens where citizens could vote to exile someone for 10 years. Imagine being voted off an island, but instead of a tropical paradise, it's your hometown. And instead of a reality TV show, it's your real life. And who could forget the infamous case of Aristides, the just, who got ostracized simply because people were tired of hearing about how just he was. Talk about a tough crowd. Now let's zoom in on the political climate of the time. Athens may have been the birthplace of democracy, but it was also a hotbed of political intrigue. Only freeborn male citizens had the privilege to participate in the democratic process. And even then, the politics were as cutthroat as an episode of House of Cards. The city was rife with factions and power struggles, with every politician trying to outmaneuver the others. And woe betide the philosopher who found themselves on the wrong side of a political debate. The trial of Socrates, anyone. Socrates, that iconic figure we all know and love, or love to debate about, was the ultimate casualty of this high-stakes environment. Charged with corrupting the youth and impiety, his trial in 399 BCE was as much about political fear as it was about philosophical dissent. The man who famously claimed to know nothing was suddenly a threat to the state, a scapegoat in an Athens still reeling from the Peloponnesian War and looking for someone to blame. Socrates' choice to drink hemlock rather than flee into exile was a final, albeit grim, philosophical statement. It was a reminder that the pursuit of truth could demand the ultimate price in a society that liked to think of itself as free-thinking. But why was Athenian society so jittery about a few philosophical musings? Well, consider the backdrop. A democracy that was constantly under pressure, whether from external enemies or internal dissent. Athenian leaders were acutely aware of the fragility of their political system. They feared that too much questioning, especially from influential figures, could destabilize the delicate balance they had achieved. Socrates, with his probing questions and refusal to accept easy answers, was like a philosophical grenade tossed into the already volatile mix. And yet, there's a certain romantic appeal to this idea of philosophy as a dangerous pursuit, isn't there? In our modern age of endless information and opinions, notion that ideas could be so powerful they threaten the very foundation of society is both thrilling and terrifying. It adds a layer of drama to the daily life of a philosopher that we often overlook. The agora wasn't just a place of intellectual debate. It was a crucible where ideas were forged in the fires of public opinion and political necessity. So, as you navigate this complex social and political landscape, remember that every word you utter isn't just a thought. It's a potential spark in a city ever watchful for the next big idea or the next big threat. The passion for debate, the thrill of intellectual conquest, and the ever-present risk of stepping too far. These are the threads that weave together the tapestry of Athenian philosophical life. And while we might romanticize the image of the philosopher standing bravely against the tide of public opinion, let's not forget the harsh reality. In a city famed for its love of wisdom, wisdom could sometimes come at a price too steep for even the most daring thinker. But don't let that deter you. Tomorrow, the agora awaits with its promise of new debates and discoveries. Just remember, in Athens, keeping your head might sometimes mean keeping your thoughts to yourself, or at least phrasing them wisely. As you lay down, let the weight of today's discussions settle, knowing that the next day brings both the thrill and the peril of philosophy in a city that loved ideas as much as it feared them. And as you drift off, ponder this. How far would you go to pursue the truth in a world where the truth might be the most dangerous thing of all? The agora will have its answer, waiting as always with open arms and sharp ears. As you ponder the perilous pursuit of truth in ancient Athens, let's dive into the daily grind of a philosopher, where the struggle was as real as the existential questions they posed. Forget the romanticized image of the philosopher as a revered celebrity in the toga-clad pantheon of intellectuals. The reality was more like a precarious balancing act on a philosophical tightrope, with plenty of opportunities to fall into the abyss of obscurity, or, worse, ridicule. Your day as a philosopher starts with a challenge even before the sun fully rises, dealing with students who fancy themselves the next big thinker. These aren't just any students. They're ambitious young Athenians, eager to make a name for themselves in the intellectual arena. They're like the ancient version of eager interns, but instead of fetching coffee, they challenge your theories with the fervor of a zealous debate club. Some might be genuinely talented, destined to carve their own niche in history. Others, well, they're more like enthusiastic parrots, echoing your ideas without adding much of their own. The economic realities of teaching these budding philosophers are not exactly lucrative. Sure, having a few dedicated students can bring in some drachmas, but it's not a steady gig. Teaching fees could vary widely, anywhere from a few arbols to several drachmas per lesson, depending on the student's family wealth and your own reputation. It's a bit like today's freelance market, where your income is as unpredictable as Greek weather in the spring. Navigating the social hierarchies of Athens presents its own set of challenges. The city might be the birthplace of democracy, but it's also a place where social status can make or break your philosophical career. Being a philosopher doesn't automatically grant you a seat at the table with the city's elite. In fact, many philosophers existed on the fringes of society, their status precarious at best. Picture yourself trying to share a groundbreaking idea at a symposium, only to be dismissed by a wealthy patron more interested in the latest gossip than the nature of the cosmos. And let's not underestimate the power of gossip in ancient Athens. The social dynamics were as complex as any modern-day reality show, with whispers and rumors circulating faster than a chariot race. A poorly timed comment or an unpopular opinion could see you socially exiled, your reputation shredded by the sharp tongues of your peers. Socrates himself wasn't immune to the rumor mill, with tales of his supposed arrogance and unorthodox teachings fueling his eventual downfall. Yet, for all the challenges, there's a certain appeal in this struggle, isn't there? The romantic notion of the philosopher as a misunderstood genius, battling against the tides of ignorance and indifference, holds a certain allure. But scratch beneath the surface, and you'll find flawed humans grappling with the same insecurities and ambitions that drive us today. They weren't infallible sages. They were thinkers trying to make sense of a world that often defied understanding. Take Socrates, for example. He's often depicted as the quintessential philosopher, a figure of wisdom and virtue. But delve into his life, and you'll find a man who could be as obstinate as he was insightful. His famous method of questioning, now known as the Socratic method, wasn't just about unearthing truth. It was also about challenging authority and provoking thought, sometimes to the point of irritation. His dialogues with fellow Athenians often left them more confused than enlightened, as he dismantled their arguments with relentless logic. The idea that philosophers were universally revered is another myth worth busting. Sure, figures like Plato and Aristotle have achieved a kind of posthumous celebrity, but in their own time, they had to hustle just like anyone else. Plato may have founded the academy, but he also had to secure funding and attract students, tasks that required more than just intellectual prowess. It was a constant juggling act of maintaining philosophical integrity while ensuring the financial viability of his school. And Aristotle, despite his eventual fame, was not exempt from the challenges of the day. He might have been a tutor to Alexander the Great, but before that prestigious gig, he spent years studying and teaching, trying to carve out a space for his ideas in a city teeming with intellectual competition. His contributions to logic and science are legendary today, but back then they were subjects of debate and sometimes skepticism. The political climate only added to the philosopher's woes. With Athens' volatile democracy swinging like a pendulum between oligarchy and democracy, the risk of being caught on the wrong side of political debate was ever present. Philosophers had to be politically savvy, navigating the shifting sands of Athenian politics while keeping their intellectual pursuits intact. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy and discretion, where a single misstep could lead to disaster. Yet, for all the pitfalls, the life of a philosopher was not without its rewards. There was a certain thrill in the pursuit of knowledge, in the challenge of unraveling the mysteries of the universe. The intellectual camaraderie, the debates that stretched long into the night, the satisfaction of a well-crafted argument, these were the moments that made the struggle worthwhile. And while the reality was often less glamorous than the legends, it was this very struggle that forged some of the greatest minds in history. So, as you navigate the bustling streets of Athens, remember that every philosopher you meet is not just a thinker but a survivor, a pioneer, and sometimes a provocateur. They are the architects of ideas, building bridges between the known and the unknown, between the myths and the truths. And while their lives might not have been as idyllic as we sometimes imagine, they were undeniably rich in thought, in debate, and in the relentless pursuit of wisdom. The agora will always be there, waiting with its cacophony of voices and its kaleidoscope of ideas. Tomorrow promises more questions, more challenges, and perhaps even a few answers. But for now, let the weight of today's insights settle, knowing that the pursuit of truth, while fraught with challenges, is a journey worth taking. And as you drift into sleep, consider this. In a world where ideas can be both a beacon and a burden, how far would you go to illuminate the path? The stars over Athens have their own stories to tell, and tomorrow, the agora will echo with yet another chapter in the ever-unfolding tale of philosophy. As you ponder the legacy of these ancient philosophers under the Athenian stars, it's clear that their influence didn't just fizzle out like the last embers of a symposium's fire. No, their debates were the intellectual kindling that sparked what we now call Western philosophy. A bit grandiose, perhaps. But let's face it, the Greeks were nothing if not ambitious in their quest for understanding. Consider Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, often dubbed the philosophical trifecta. Each one played a unique role in shaping the tapestry of Western thought. Socrates, with his relentless questioning, laid the groundwork for critical thinking. His method was simple yet profound. Ask enough questions, and you might just stumble upon the truth. It's like the original version of a Reddit AMA, but with a bit more gravitas and a lot less meme culture. Plato, Socrates' most famous student, took his mentor's teachings and ran with them, straight into the realm of ideal forms and the notorious allegory of the cave. He envisioned a world of perfect forms, where everything we see is just a shadow of its true self. Sure, it sounds a bit like a plot twist in a Christopher Nolan film, but it was Plato's way of exploring the difference between perception and reality. Think of it as philosophy's first foray into the matrix. Then there's Aristotle, Plato's most notable student, who decided to take a slightly different tack. Rather than getting lost in the clouds of idealism, Aristotle grounded his philosophy in the observable world. He was like the Sherlock Holmes of ancient Greece, examining evidence and drawing conclusions based on what he could see, hear, and measure. His work laid the foundations for scientific inquiry, making him the intellectual forefather of everything from biology to political science. It's no small feat that these philosophers managed to lay the groundwork for centuries of debate. Their ideas may have been spawned from the chaos of the agora, but they transcended the noise to become the cornerstones of Western philosophy. And while it's easy to romanticize their contributions, let's not forget the sweat equity involved in their intellectual labor. These weren't epiphanies handed down from Mount Olympus. They were the result of relentless questioning, rigorous debate, and occasionally a generous helping of olive oil-fueled inspiration. But why do these ancient ideas still resonate today? Well, despite all our technological advances and societal progress, the big questions remain surprisingly unchanged. What is justice? What is the good life? These questions are as relevant now as they were in the dusty streets of Athens. Sure, we've traded our chittens for jeans and scrolls for smartphones, but the quest for understanding what it means to live a meaningful life is timeless. The appeal of ancient Greek philosophy lies in its universality. It's like the intellectual equivalent of comfort food. No matter where you are or what era you're in, there's something inherently satisfying about chewing over the same questions that puzzled Socrates and his contemporaries. And while the modern world offers no shortage of distractions, the allure of deep philosophical debate still captivates minds eager to explore the depths of human consciousness. Yet, it's not just the questions themselves that matter. It's the way these philosophers approach them. Their legacy is not just in the answers they provided, many of which are still contested, but in the methodology they developed. Critical thinking, logical reasoning, and open dialogue are the true gifts of Greek philosophy, forming the backbone of everything from modern education to democratic governance. In a world increasingly driven by sound bites and hot takes, the slow, deliberate pace of philosophical inquiry may seem like an anachronism. But perhaps that's exactly why it matters. In a time when information is abundant, but wisdom seems scarce, the teachings of these ancient thinkers offer a roadmap for navigating the complexities of modern life. Their legacy endures not because they solved all the riddles of existence, but because they dared to ask the questions in the first place. So, as the night deepens and the agora falls silent, remember that the legacy of ancient Greek philosophers is more than just dusty tomes and ivory tower discussions. It's a living tradition, woven into the very fabric of contemporary thought. Their ideas continue to challenge us, provoke us, and inspire us to look beyond the surface of our daily lives. And as you drift into sleep, consider this. In a world always rushing forward, there's immense value in pausing to ponder where we've come from and where we're headed. The ancient Greeks might have been grappling with questions of life, the universe, and everything millennia ago, but their intellectual journey is far from over. It's a journey that invites each of us to take part, armed with nothing but curiosity and a willingness to question the status quo. Tomorrow, the Agora will be there once more, a timeless stage for the ongoing drama of human thought.